You are listening the compilation of the most interesting Reddit stories. Let's dive into them. Welcome to a very interesting r/pro revenge story from Switch SCE to Ox, where OP's boss screw him up by giving him responsibilities of the directors, but denied the title and proper compensation, and OP takes a brutal revenge. Screw me on my bonus? Make me do 2 job? Enjoy the backwater you earned. I apologize for the length of this in advance. This happened some years ago, but still seems relevant today, so I thought I would share the story. So back in the 90s, I was working for a European-based financial firm. US offices were managed by Europeans, with a regional head office in New York. Younger employees were generally underpaid and overworked, as in your first few years out of college, the promised reward was being promoted to a director position, where the salary, perks, and bonus structure would really kick in. Kind of like how law firms promote their younger lawyers to partners after a long wait. As junior associates, the only good news was that we received the same 5 weeks of vacation per year, plus a few weeks of sick leave, as our European counterparts, which for me meant a lot of camping and staycations during the summer, since I didn't really make enough to travel to exotic/expensive locations. The offices were set up in a way where the business development, BD, directors each had a junior associate. The BD guys would generally network, schmooze, and travel around their territories to meet clients and new prospects. Once back in the office, the BD guys would dump their meeting notes on the desks of their junior associates to follow up and land the business, aka a hunter/Skinner model. As a junior associate, I was pretty busy assisting a BD, so I routinely rolled over at least 2 weeks of vacation every year. I had worked at the firm for 3 years and was starting to get antsy for a promotion. Right after Thanksgiving, my boss in the West Coast office told me that I was being transferred and promoted to the Southeast office come the new year. I really had no interest in working in and living in the Southeast, but I wanted to advance my career. I rolled over my usual 2 weeks of vacation into the next year, so I was eligible for 7 weeks of vacation that next year. After celebrating New Year's with my family in CA, I packed up my car and drove across the country. Once in the new office, I settled in and met my new boss, who promptly informed me that he wasn't actually promoting me to director, though I was being given the responsibilities of the role, as he judged me to be too young, but was also told that if I demonstrated that I could do the job, I would be promoted next year. I was pissed, but didn't have a choice other than moving back home and starting from scratch, so I agreed to it. I disliked my new boss instantly, as coworkers told me he was flaunting his management perks, which consisted of large allowances for housing and automobiles, which were paid for by sales production from employees like myself. Turned out he was related to a serving member of the board of directors back in Europe, which is how he got the job as a regional manager. Everyone knew he didn't have the skills to do our job, so he just collected fat checks, went to expensive restaurants with friends, and billed it to the company as client development, all the while leasing a new Mercedes every 2 years on the company's dime, while generally being a d*** to everyone who worked for him. During the first week, I also met my junior associate, Jeremy. We sat down and discussed some accounts that I'd inherited that were in backwater locations none of the other directors wanted to visit. Jeremy was professional, but I got the distinct impression Jeremy hated me, though I didn't know why. I started traveling around to meet my clients and prospects over the next few weeks, usually spending at least 3 or 4 days on the road, back in the office on Fridays, to go over follow-ups on business leads with Jeremy and execute whatever paperwork needed to be taken care of. About a month later, I returned from one of my trips and learned that Jeremy had quit. It turned out that he was mad that he'd been passed over for the position that I'd been given. I couldn't fault him, as I probably would have done the same thing. I asked my manager to hire someone else to back me up, but he was hesitant to do so, reasoning that my client portfolio was just starting out, so I could do both roles until it made sense to staff up. I pointed out that it would be hard to be an effective business development officer if I had no support system to help grow my client portfolio. But he chose not to listen, knowing that I had little recourse but to shut the hell up. I spent the rest of the year working my ass off. This was right before email and internet were common, so executing business on the road was hard. Fax machines were the bane of my existence. Even though laptops were reserved for directors, my boss was kind enough, heavy sarcasm, to let me use a company laptop on which I would handle all of the paperwork to process client business from hotel business centers late at night or early in the morning. So I learned to live on 5 hours of sleep or to sleep on planes whenever I could. After dealing with problems from some irate clients, I eventually paid for my own personal cell phone. Not everyone had them in the mid-90s, and our directors had just started getting company-paid phones that year, as I had to handle customers from the road. I just gave my personal cell number for clients to call so I could handle problems from the road. I landed a few big clients by a combination of luck and hard work, and got some solid referrals, which led to more referrals, so within a few months I was gaining some serious momentum. Since I didn't have an associate to help me, that meant I spent the weekends and late nights back at the office handling paperwork, then back on the road during the week. I was so busy working both sides of the job that by December of that year, I hadn't taken my mandatory 2 weeks of vacation. I had some new clients that needed to be handled by year-end, so I was granted a vacation waiver, meaning that my 7 weeks of vacation would roll over into the next year, adding up to 12 weeks of vacation plus sick time for the coming year. It was a big hassle for HR to process the waiver, but since I had produced a lot of new business, my manager was all too happy to order it done. I wasn't upset about working through year-end, though I flew back and forth to CA for Christmas on a 24-hour turnaround. I rationalized it, hoping that I would get paid the first big bonus of my career in a few months. At that time, European firms paid their bonuses in mid-April, while employees of US-based firms got their bonuses by end of January. If you were planning on switching jobs early in the new year, working at a European firm meant that sometimes you left money on the table, aka golden handcuffs. So the timing of switching firms was important. I continued to work at my frenetic pace through April, taking no vacation as I was bringing in more and more clients, and digging myself out of paperwork when I wasn't on the road. In the new year, we had some meetings about scorecards and sales goals, and I let my office in some of the categories and was number 1 for overall production. Finally, in mid-April, my boss called me in and announced it was time to discuss my bonus/annual review. I eagerly sat down, licking my chops because I was assuming my bonus would be equal to my base salary at least, if not double. He handed me a piece of paper, and it showed a number that was almost 90% less than I was expecting for my bonus. I literally laughed out loud and told him it was a little late for an April Fool's joke, but he wasn't smiling. He proceeded to tell me how proud he was of me, but that since I wasn't a director, the bonus that I received was the maximum amount he would give me, as there wasn't any more money in the budget. I sat there in shock for a while, then kept asking the same question in different ways. Basically, why did he screw me on my bonus? It was like talking to a brick wall. Despite pointing to the scorecard that showed me as the best producer in the office, all the while having no junior associate, he wasn't having it. I was crushed, but then asked him if he was promoting me to director since I had demonstrated that I could produce, hoping that title would be a gateway into the big payday the following year. He shook his head and replied, "Maybe next year if you prove this year wasn't a fluke." It was a gut punch. He also rationalized that while my review was positive, I had some flaws that I needed to work on. Mainly, that I didn't work very well in a team atmosphere. I reminded him that I was a team of 1, so there wasn't anybody on my team to complain about me. A switch finally flipped in my brain as I realized I'd just gotten majorly screwed and there was no changing the outcome. I told him that I was feeling ill and would be taking some sick days, so I got up and left his office. Coworkers said I looked as white as a ghost as I walked out of his office, so they knew something was wrong. I forwarded my incoming calls to his extension, packed up my important papers in case I decided to never come back, then headed to my apartment in a complete rage. I called my family and told them that I needed to come home for some much-deserved vacation, so after drinking myself senseless for 48 hours and forwarding all my calls to voicemail, I called into work the following Monday and told my boss I would be taking a vacation week. He was pretty angry about the short notice, as he'd been dealing with my irate clients contacting him about their problems, since I couldn't be reached, and he didn't have much of a clue as to how to handle the paperwork necessary to do the work. So other associates were now being called in to help handle my workload. I flew home and made a few calls to people I'd worked with, hoping for some job leads. I managed to grab a lunch with an old associate who had left the firm, and he gave me some ideas and contacts, so I spent the rest of my vacation looking for a new job. I knew the timing sucked so out of options, I went back to my job the following week. First day back, I looked at my HR data and realized that I still had 11 weeks of vacation to use that year, plus a few more weeks of sick leave. Around that time, there was a company-wide conference call to celebrate a big company milestone. I think the firm was 125 years old, but didn't care anymore. To celebrate the big anniversary, we were told we would be getting an extra week of vacation that year, meaning once again, I had 3 months of vacation in my account. As a high performer, I was also selected to spend a few weeks in New York during the summer and fall for some management training, so that meant additional time out of the office. The next month was a blur of looking at different vacations options for me to take that year. I had accrued a lot of hotel/rental car points and frequent flyer miles during the past year of traveling around, so I spent my days in the office doing as little client work as I could get away with, while spending the rest of my time on the phone with the frequent flyer/hotel points, customer service reps, trying to squeeze as much vacation out of my miles and points as I could. By the end of May, I submitted my vacation requests, which detailed how I was going to take 3 months of vacation in the 7 remaining months of the year. I submitted the forms to HR, and within a day, my boss called me in to discuss my schedule, as he realized I was basically going to be gone for almost 2 weeks out of every month for the rest of the year. I was wrapping my vacations around federal and bank holidays whenever I could manage it. He told me that he was rejecting my vacation schedule since there wasn't anybody to cover my clients in my absence. I asked him to call in the HR rep into his office to have his stance officially on record. He objected, but I said I wouldn't discuss such matters without an HR rep present. HR was called in, and my boss told HR he was rejecting my vacation schedule, but HR responded that I was legally entitled to take the vacation days, so he couldn't reject the request. I also told him that henceforth I wouldn't be handling any of my customers from my personal cell phone if I was out of the office, so I would be forwarding my work phone to his when I was on vacation or doing business development trips. Also told him I was going to Europe on 2 different trips and would be unable to be contacted since I didn't have a company-issued cell phone. He was pissed, but knew that unless he promoted me to director and issue me a cell phone, he couldn't do anything about my new stance. After that, I only did business development in areas where I like to travel, and more importantly, vacation. Until that point, I had always said yes to any meetings in backwater locations if it represented a chance to land a new client. Having learned my lesson the hard way, I didn't want any new clients to begin with, and certainly none living in areas I didn't like to visit. Trips to Florida became common. If I was traveling, I would typically spend Monday to Wednesday making very infrequent sales calls. Most of my schedule was falsified with fake prospects, so I could spend afternoons playing golf or hanging out at hotel pools trolling for women my age. Then would take off Thursday and Friday, with vacation/sick days, so I could hang out and have fun, using hotel points to extend my stays for free. Since I was still underpaid, I ate cheaply and learned to squeeze as much out of my trips for the least amount of money I could manage while still having fun. My boss was now irate with all of the customer calls coming to him, but he refused to hire an assistant for me, so I kept forwarding my line to his when I was out of office. Whenever I was back in the office, pretty infrequent at this point, he would routinely lambaste me with verbal warnings about poor performance reviews, but I would just shrug my shoulders and tell him that maybe he was right not to promote me to director, since I was such a disappointment. He was also pissed because he'd been commended for having such a high-producing office the year before, mostly courtesy of my efforts. And now, he was getting a lot of heat from New York that his new client numbers were down. Since I had frequent flyer miles and hotel points, but not a lot of money, I backpacked through Europe on 2 different 2-week trips that summer, and also took a number of vacations back home, diligently following up on job leads on the West Coast that I had cultivated whenever I was in the office. By October, I started to firm up some conversations with a prospective employer back in California, and finally received a concrete job offer in mid-November. I waited until December 15th to inform my boss that I was quitting the firm, and told him I would be using my 2 remaining weeks of vacation/sick leave so that my resignation was effective immediately. He was surprised that I didn't wait until April to leave, but I laughed, telling him I knew he was going to screw me on my bonus anyway, so the money wasn't worth waiting around for. He then asked me to stay through the end of January in order to give him enough time to hire and train an assistant or a replacement to handle my clients. I refused, Noting that Jeremy had quit 20 months before, so he had plenty of time to prepare for this eventuality. As I was packing up my office and informing coworkers about my departure, I got a knock on my office door from the HR rep as he wanted to conduct an exit interview. He closed the door and I aired out all of my dirty laundry. I told HR the firm had lost me when my boss had screwed me on my bonus, repeating the story that there wasn't any money in the budget. The HR counterpart shook his head and laughed at my boss's stupidity, noting that since Jeremy had been an employee at the beginning of the year I'd arrived, his salary and bonus was actually in the budget for the whole year. As such, my boss could have allocated the amount that he would have paid Jeremy to my bonus, which probably would have kept me reasonably happy. Instead, he decided to screw me over. I moved back to California that week and started the new job the first week of January. 3 months into my new job, I got a call from a coworker at my previous firm. He called to tell me that after I left, HR from the head office in New York came down early in the new year to interview my former coworkers. Apparently, my sudden departure had raised some eyebrows in New York, as they viewed me as a rising star, and questions were asked why I left so abruptly. Apparently, other employees in my office had also gotten screwed in various ways. Lots of client development meal expenses were rejected for being too expensive by the guy who was routinely billing his meals with friends to the firm. So after listening to all of the complaints, New York management decided to make a change year before he was due to be rotated back to Europe. Since he was related to a guy on the board, they couldn't fire him, so they reassigned my old boss to some backwater farm town. I couldn't pronounce the town, but was told it was the kind of place that doesn't provide perks like allowances for housing, accounts for expensive steak restaurants, or a new Mercedes. I started my own company 5 years back, and it's worked out pretty well. Even though I got screwed 25 years ago, I always think about that experience fondly, as I probably would have worked for a company like that for my entire life, had I not been shown how companies and bosses will generally screw you over if given half a chance. It was eye-opening and put me on a path to eventually start my own firm, so for that I'm forever grateful. I always think about that situation around New Year's to remind myself of how far I've come and for how not to treat my employees. Hopefully some of you can benefit from my experience without all of the drama I went through. Happy New Year! TLDR. So busy at a new job that I didn't even have time to take a vacation. Boss screwed me on my bonus after I was the top producer, so I dumped my customers back into his lap and spent the rest of the year on fake sales calls or on vacation. Quit and eventually started my own company. The revenge was really satisfying and up to the mark. Screwing up people is a norm in the corporate sector, but OP's boss messed with the wrong person. OP took full advantage of his 12 weeks privileged leaves and struck a heavy revenge, and the final was to establish a successful competitor company. The revenge was truly mind-blowing. Let's now move on to the next story from Basecap, where OP got. Back in the early 2010s, I started working for a big internet-based company in the UK. The company was opening a new office with a new subdivision in London. When I started, there were 2 team leaders and the office manager. The 2 teams were the content team and the SEO, search engine optimization, team. I was recruited to be the development team lead, that is, web development. When I was interviewed for the job, both the office manager and SEO team lead were conducting the interview. During the interview, I would respond, "Yes, of course," or "You know you would get a better result doing X, Y, or Z." So, I got offered the job, and for the first year, there was so much going on. As well as building a team, I also had a portfolio of websites that needed to be redeveloped and redesigned. It was at this point that some flags started to pop up. I would have the SEO team lead, we will call him Andy, coming to me and telling me that I needed to do things the way he wanted. I would always push back and say no, and give a reason why I was doing things the way I was. Andy would get irate and would complain to the office manager about me. When the office manager would ask me about it, I would explain what had happened and why I had said no, and the office manager would leave it there because at the end of the day, I was the one with the experience in web development, not Andy. This happened a few times over the first year, and I then realized that the reason Andy was getting so irate was that he thought that I would be a yes man to him. Sorry, buddy, that is not who I am. So now that we have the backstory, let's get into what led to the revenge. Me and the team had been working hard to get 2 of the new websites completed, and I was due to show them off to the board before they went live. This company's head office was in another part of the country, and I had to leave the office in London at about lunchtime. So I arrived at the hotel across the road from the head office around 4 p.m. and jumped on my laptop to start going through the sites to run some tests. I was testing functionality, making sure the look and feel were correct, things like that. Then it happened. We found a major bug that caused a significant issue with the functionality of the website. So it is at this point that I am going to introduce the star of our story, Johnny, not real name but attacked all the same, who was my senior developer. Me and Johnny worked through the night, me in the hotel room and him in the London office. We finally fixed the bug at about 7 a.m. The following day, my meeting with the board was at 10 a.m. So after getting showered, fed, and over to the office, I started my day with 0 hours of sleep. I go into the meeting, and the first thing that is said is the CEO asking if I was okay. I had met him a few times, and he was a really nice guy. I explained that we had found an issue with the sites yesterday, and me and Johnny had worked through the night to fix it before the meeting. Long story short, everyone was really impressed and loved the new sites. At the end of the meeting, the CEO pulled me aside and thanked me for everything, and then told me to go home and get some sleep. It was about a 3-hour train ride to London, and then another hour home. I thanked him, and I was on my way. After taking my team out for a well-deserved lunch to say thank you, the office manager then organized a night out for the whole office to celebrate on the following Friday. We started off at a fancy bar. Not my sort of thing. I am a man of cheap tastes. And then everyone moved on to a small club. I went to the club for a bit, but then left quite early in the night, as I needed to get a train home. I said my goodbyes, and then headed home. I came into the office on Monday, and there was something going on. I spoke with Emma, not real name, the content team's lead. She did not know what was going on, but there were people from the head office, HR, and others. Then a few minutes later, all the team leaders were called into a meeting. We were all squished in one of the small meeting rooms. There was the office manager, 2 members of the HR team from the head office, and the 3 team leaders, including myself. So, HR explained that there had been a complaint made against Johnny. A member of the SEO team, we will call him Mark, had called Andy on Friday, saying that Johnny had been making racist comments while everyone was out at the club. Both myself and Emma were taken aback. This was not like Johnny. On a side note, I felt that I needed to explain the races of people involved. This is just for context, and not an attack on anyone involved. Johnny, Emma, and I are white British. Andy is African, born in Britain, I believe, and Mark is Indian, once again, I believe. The whole day was spent with HR doing interviews with the other people that were there that night, and we then all reconvened towards the end of the day. The result of the interviews was that no one had heard anything like what Mark was saying. So it was Mark's word against Johnny's. This was not acceptable for Andy. He wanted Johnny fired and cried, "We could not have someone like that in the office." Both Emma and I looked at each other and thought that it was strange that he was so insistent on firing Johnny with no evidence. Both the office manager and HR agreed, and Johnny was let off with a warning, and to be aware in the future of how things he says could be misinterpreted. Life went back to normal in the office. That is, until about 2 months later. The story of what had happened had gone around the office, about 12 people. Then one afternoon, I was pulled aside by one of the guys on the content team, and he said that he had overheard Andy and Mark talking, and thought I should know. We went into one of the meeting rooms, and he laid everything out. What I heard made my blood boil, and I think had I been in a cartoon, I would have been erupting from my ears. He told me that the racism complaint was faked, and a plan that Andy had to attack my team because I would not bend to his demands. He and Mark were on a call outside the club. Andy was not there that night, and that is when he heard what they were doing. It later came out that their plan was to make the complaint against Johnny and get him fired, which would then lead on to Andy complaining that I was not fit to run a team if I let that sort of thing happen under my leadership. My first question was why he didn't bring this up with HR in the interviews. He said that he did, but it was his word against both Andy and Mark. I thanked him for this and went on with what I was doing. I was pissed. There was no way that I was going to let this slide, but I knew that if I was going to go after them, I needed to have everything in place beforehand. I didn't tell Johnny what I had been told, and asked the guy that told me to keep it to himself for now. I didn't want Johnny to get upset and do something that would get him fired or worse, affect any revenge I could dish out. So, I watched. I watched everything the SEO team did and didn't do. Then it happened. It was like angels had descended from heaven to deliver me the winning lottery ticket. The building we were in was a 3-story building with a main staircase with a door on each floor to the offices. The stairs also lead to a door out to the street. At the time, I was a casual smoker and used it to get a break from the screen and clear my head if something I was working on was not going well. So, I walked out of the door to the office and into the stairwell. And who is there? Mark of all people. He is on the phone, and he goes white as a sheet when he sees me. Now he is mid-sentence with the person on the other end of the phone, and as I am walking past, he is forced to carry on the conversation. I overhear, and from what he is saying, I can tell that he is talking to a school or something like that. The conversation sounded like he was looking for information about applying and about a visa. I thought that was a strange call to be having, and something was fishy about it. I had my suspicions as to what was going on, but nothing concrete at this time. A few days later, I was heading back up to the head office, and by that time, we had a new office manager who lived near the head office, so was based there most of the time. When I got there, I dropped my things off at the hotel and headed over to the office. I went to his desk and asked to have a quick chat. I explained to him what I had overheard Mark talking about on the phone and said that maybe the company might like to look at his visa status. A week went by and nothing seemed to happen. Then, bam! He stopped showing up at the office. A few days later, I got told what had happened by one of the other SEO team members. Mark had been fired with immediate effect for no longer having the correct visa to work in the UK. The company did not want to get involved in sponsoring a new visa for him. I don't know why. I started asking questions around the office, random chit-chat, and I found out that Mark is from Dubai, and he was here on his wife's student visa. I don't know how that works, but it was all above board. I also found out that his wife's course had finished, and that left them with a small window of time to get a new visa. That is when it all clicked. Now there are some dodgy people in London and everywhere else, and they would set up these fake colleges that would sign people up to get visas to live and work in the UK. At some point before or after this, I saw a program on this, and normally these were set up in tiny offices that you couldn't swing a cat in, let alone be a college. They were used as postal addresses for the college, and they would charge a course fee to be enrolled, and thus be able to apply for a student visa. So, what Mark was trying to do is to get enrolled in one of these colleges so that he could stay in the UK and carry on working. I found out a few weeks later that Mark and his wife did have to leave the UK and go back to Dubai because he didn't have any money coming in to pay for his new college course. Bye, Mark. When I found out that Mark had been let go, I pulled Johnny aside and filled him in on everything. He could not believe it and was stunned that they would try and do that. I apologized to him, as it was my fault that he had been targeted by them in a way to get at me. He would not accept it and said that I had gone above and beyond in defending him. Following on from this, I made it quite clear to Andy that I knew what he and Mark had done, and that I would not be forgetting it, and to watch his back. I made sure we were not in earshot of anyone else. About 2 months later, Andy handed in his notice and left the company, never to be seen or heard from again. I have told this story to some people over the years, and I have been asked so many times if I feel guilty for what I did. I always respond the same way. I feel guilty that Johnny was wrongfully accused and targeted. I don't feel guilty about what I did to Mark. You don't mess with my friends, family, or team. The revenge was truly remarkable. Andy's expectation that OP would be a yes man to him was unjustifiable. And when OP realized that the tide was not in his favor, he played dirty by accusing OP's team member of being racist. But finally, the suspicious conversation of Andy with a fake college threw Andy in the hot oil, which finally ruined Andy's career. Welcome to the Am I the A-hole story from Lost Platform 7670. Hey everyone, I, 28F, am getting married in a few months, and there's some drama in the family about my decision not to invite my brother, 31M, to the wedding. Here's what happened. My fiancé, 30M, and I have been together for 5 years, and we recently got engaged. We threw an engagement party to celebrate with close friends and family. My brother has always had a bit of a competitive streak with me, but I never thought it would be a problem during such an important event. At the party, after a few drinks, my brother decided to make a big announcement. He and his girlfriend, 29F, are also engaged. The timing was awful. He made his announcement in the middle of my speech thanking everyone for coming. People started congratulating him, and the focus completely shifted to him and his fiancée. I felt like my special moment was taken away. It wasn't just me. My parents and friends were also upset with how he handled it. They thought it was super inappropriate to steal the spotlight at my engagement party. My fiancée and I ended up leaving early, feeling embarrassed and hurt. Later, I confronted my brother, and he just shrugged it off, saying he didn't think it was a big deal and that it was just a party. When I told him how hurt I was, he brushed it off and said I was being overly sensitive. He never apologized, and since then, our relationship has been strained. Now that we're planning the wedding, I've decided not to invite him. When my parents found out, they were furious, saying that I was being petty and that family should come first. They think it's not fair to exclude him from such an important event, even though they also acknowledged that what he did was wrong. Some of my friends are on my side, saying I have every right to decide who comes to my wedding. But others think I'm overreacting and should let it go for the sake of family peace. My fiancé supports my decision, but he doesn't want me to regret it later. So, AITA for not inviting my brother to my wedding after what he did at my engagement party. OP is not an AH for not inviting her brother to her wedding. OP's brother is an AH, a big AH for stealing the spotlight at her engagement party by announcing his own engagement. OP's reaction is justified, and she is not overreacting here. So, for scores, I would rate OP's brother 2.5 and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from Throwaway 8632, 47732, where OP refuses to take in his pregnant daughter, who abandoned him for her toxic mom. My daughter left me to stay with her mom and ignored me. AITA for not talking to her after she came back to me pregnant. I raised my 24-year-old daughter on my own. I had my daughter when I was very young. I was 19. Her mom broke up with me and said she doesn't want to be responsible for a child, and I had her full custody. My ex gave up her rights to her daughter and left who knows where. It was really hard for me to raise her and take care of her. Thankfully, my sister and my mom helped me taking care of her when I was working. But still, it was hard for me taking care of my daughter, working and doing chores and other stuff all on my own. For her, I even sacrificed dating or marriage. I didn't want my daughter to have a stepmom or anything like that. My daughter's and her mom's relation started flourishing 2 years ago. Her mom visited me and said she wanted to talk to her daughter. I didn't want to allow her, but I thought my daughter needs to know about her mom. They have gotten closer and hang out a lot. I didn't have a problem with that, but 10 months ago, my daughter said she wants to go live with her mom. I refused. I told her it's better she just stays with me and visit her mom every day if she wants. But my daughter didn't listen to me. She said she's an adult and can do whatever she wants. I tried explaining and told her repeatedly that my ex is not a good person, but my daughter didn't listen to me. After she left, I wasn't in contact with my daughter for all these months. I tried, but she would deny meeting me and always tell me she's busy or other excuses, and we only talked to each other on the phone. But 5 days ago, my daughter visited me, and she was crying. I was angry at her for ignoring me for all this time, but I took her in. She hugged me right away, and after a while she told me the truth. She told me that she's pregnant, and her mom kicked her out after she ran out of money I gave her. I was so shocked because I didn't even know my daughter had a boyfriend, but now my daughter is pregnant. I love my daughter very much. Even if she has betrayed me, I couldn't just deny her entry to my house. I let her in. She is staying with me once again, but I do not talk to her. She told me she found out that she's pregnant a month ago, and after she told her mum, she was kicked out after a lot of taunting for days, and her ex-BF doesn't want to take care of her child, so she needs my legal help. I told her I will help her with everything, but do not talk to me. I said, I did everything for you, sacrificed everything for you, but you didn't even come back to your home or meet your father even once. I haven't been talking to my daughter ever since she came back. She, on the other hand, is depressed and suddenly turned back into a 9-year-old. She would randomly hug me and come to my side to sleep, and while sleeping she hugs me and cry, and I feel like she wants her father's comfort, so I hug her back and let her sleep. My daughter begs me to talk to her and says that she needs her father, but I think I should punish my daughter for just abandoning me. That's why I'm giving her silent treatment, though I will help her with everything else. Am I wrong for being upset with my daughter? OP is not an AH here. Her daughter is an AH for leaving her father and returning to her toxic mother, who abandoned her during childhood. OP's daughter, instead of praising his continuous efforts, left him alone. She deserves the silent treatment from OP after returning to him. As for the score, I would rate OP's daughter 2 out of 5 and OP 0 on the AH scale. Let's now jump onto the next story from Kexty, where OP hesitate to reconcile to his brother again after he abandoned him when OP needed him the most. AITA, for not wanting to get close again to my brother after he abandoned me when I needed him the most. When I was 12-year-old, I told my parents that I had been sexually abused by a family member for 6 years, 4 to 10. Obviously, they were not happy and asked if I wanted the police involved. I said yes, but because this was the patriarch of the family, I don't blame them. They chose to do the opposite. They've never experienced this before. So after, life went on, and I continued seeing this person until I was 15. Nobody knew about it except my parents, until I eventually broke down one day and demanded law enforcement be involved. At this point, I told another family member about it, and how it affected me mentally, only to find out that he did the exact same thing to her. So now the secret is out, and everybody knows that we've started the court process except one person. My brother. My brother and his family lives a few hours away, and my father didn't feel it was something to tell him over the phone, so we let him know we needed to speak, and would be there the next day. 5 minutes on the road, and my brother called saying we didn't need to come, and he already knew what was happening. He is a detective with his local PD, and had looked up our last names and saw the charges before we could talk to him. Since that day, he wanted nothing to do with us, even though he would tell me and his other siblings that he wasn't abandoning us, but the older people in the family. But since that day, all we got was Christmas texts and the occasional HBD. I asked him to come to my HS graduation, and he rejected. He was so gone that I'd stay up at night and wonder if he would even come to my funeral. Well, last year, 2023, after 6 years of no real communication, he apologized to everyone for how he reacted and wanted all of us back in his life. He let us know that he had 3 kids we never knew about and wanted us to come over and see them. So of course we did. We were excited. I've seen him 2 times since then. My family has been way more. Now that the excitement is over, I now find myself mad. He has made no effort to make the few-hour trip to our house even once. It's always us that has to come to him. He still doesn't text me, only the adults. He has never actually talked to me about everything that happened, just sorry. Essentially, in my head, I'm thinking, you abandoned me when I needed my big brother the most. I've wanted our relationship to be back to normal the past 6 years, but couldn't because you didn't want that. But now that you want one, I have to come running? I feel like an AH because everyone around me wants me to go with them to his house, because they want his kids to know their aunt, but I can't get past all the shit I've been through and how I was abandoned at the worst possible time. I also feel like shit because I'm so close to my other nephew, but not his kids. I want a relationship, but at the same time, it's been 6 years, and as brutal as it sounds, I convinced myself he died because that was easier to digest than being abandoned. So, AITA, because I feel this way, and I'm not ready to act like nothing happened. AITA for not wanting to get too close to him or his kids, in fear he could abandon me again at the drop of a hat. AITA for now being the one to maybe deny the relationship. OP is not an AH here. His family, including his parents and brother, abandoned him during a traumatic time in his life. His brother, who is a detective and should have been there to help him, barely contacted him. So, I would rate OP's brother 2.5 and his parents 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP gets 0. Let's now move on the next story from Pineapple Senior 4105, where after his divorce with his wife, OP enter into a relationship with his ex's best friend. When OP's ex-wife learned about it, she accused him of cheating him during their marriage, and it creates a dilemma for their children. Would I be an a-hole if I proposed a girl who was my ex-wife's ex-best friend? My future wife Sarah is wonderful. I met her 1 year after I met my ex-wife. I've always admired Sarah. She was always an upright and honest person, fighting for minorities, volunteering for associations, and was also very funny. She and my ex were great friends. But Sarah kept her distance from me when I wanted to get to know her. But over the years, we became very good friends. Then, 7 years ago, my ex-wife Martha, 38F, cheated on me with a colleague of hers. I had my doubts, so I asked Sarah, 36F, if she knew anything about it. She told me she didn't know anything. I did my research and found proof of my ex's affair, and to top it all off, this colleague came to our house from time to time with other people, so he knew my family. I left Martha directly, and it was a difficult ordeal, especially for my daughter Lily, 15F. During this ordeal, Sarah was really a shoulder for me. She cut ties with my ex, and as I had nowhere to go after the divorce, she refused to let me spend my money in hotels and allowed me to stay at her place. All my other friends were married, and I didn't want to disturb them, and my family lives too far away. Sarah was very patient with me and always listened to me. When my ex heard I was living with Sarah, she laughed and said she wasn't surprised. I asked her what she meant, but she didn't answer. My daughter came to visit me and was extremely unpleasant with Sarah. I had asked her why, and she told me that her mother had told her that the reason we had divorced was that I was in love with Sarah. I was furious and phoned my ex. She told me not to pretend and that she knew I had feelings for Sarah. I didn't want to hear any more and hung up. It had been years since I'd felt the need to finish my work and find the person I loved, and with Sarah, I was always looking forward to coming home. One night, we slept together and became a couple. Things went very fast as Sarah got pregnant, and we had our son Caleb, 5M. When my son was born, Lily became surprisingly calm and got on very well with him, even though she was always so disagreeable with Sarah. To this day, Lily adores Caleb and even overprotects him. When she's at home, and I scold Caleb for something stupid, she gets very angry and decides to take him with her and lock herself in her room with him. It's hard to spend time with my son when Lily's around because she monopolizes him, but Sarah says I should be happy that Lily loves Caleb. 1 week ago, I proposed to Sarah and she said yes. When my ex found out that Sarah and I were getting married, she came to our house furious. Fortunately, Sarah wasn't there at the time. My ex told me she was disgusted that I had used Sarah's altruism to push my sick obsession with her. I shot back that she was crazy and that I didn't know what she was talking about. Martha said that throughout our marriage, all I could think of was Sarah's name, that every time I did a favor for someone in need, I justified it by saying that Sarah would have done the same thing, that I never gave to associations that help minorities, but when I learned that Sarah had made a donation, I did the same, that I wasn't even interested in the BLM movement, but for Sarah I was an expert, that during our evenings with friends, I always sought her gaze, and that I smiled like a child when she was around. And the times I refused her, she told me I didn't need to say why, and that she was doing it on purpose to suggest a meeting with Sarah, and to see my reaction, when she told me the three of us had something planned every time she asked for, I refused, saying I had to save energy for the next day. I just told her she was crazy, and I told her to leave because she was going to wake up my son, at which point she laughed and said that I'd never been afraid of waking Lily up when she was little, but that for the child I had with Sarah, I treated him differently from my daughter, especially as I'd always wanted to have a boy, and the fact that it was Sarah who gave me my first son was something else I had to put on my list where I put Sarah's exploits. I was furious and told her to get the hell out of my house. I never told Sarah that Martha had come to make a scene. More importantly, I admit that I admired Sarah very much, but I never saw it as an obsession. Above all, I never imagined myself married to Sarah when I was with Martha, and it's true that I always wanted a son, but I also love Lily. She's the one who cheated on me, so why am I the bad guy? I really wonder if I'm the asshole. OP is not an AH for proposing to her ex-wife's ex-best friend. Instead, OP's ex-wife is an AH who cheated on her husband, and now her accusations seem to be baseless, and that now OP has every right to come into a relationship with anyone. OP's ex is being entitled. So I would rate OP's ex-wife 2, and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's move on to the next story from Frustrated Koala. 42069, where OP refuses to accept his entitled ex-girlfriend's apology, who left him for her friend. AITA for refusing my ex-girlfriend apology and calling her struggles karma for choosing her manipulative friend over me. I'm 28M, who was dating Kelly, 27F, for 3 years, planning to propose with an engagement ring and a luxury vacation. However, her best friend, Nat, 27F, was always a problem. From the start, Nat disliked me and tried to break us up by falsely accusing me of cheating and convincing Kelly I was controlling. This caused many arguments, but Kelly always defended Nat. In January 2024, I reached my limit. We were celebrating my birthday, and Kelly invited Nat despite my objections. Nat dominated the conversation, talking about her financial issues. I asked Kelly to intervene, but when she tried, Nat accused her of not caring and then attacked me, calling me controlling. I lost my temper, calling her a manipulative bitch. Nat physically assaulted me, leaving bruises. The day was ruined, and back home, I gave Kelly an ultimatum, either me or Nat. Kelly argued it was unfair to make her choose. We fought, and when Kelly said I provoked Nat by insulting her, I told her to leave. After threatening to call the cops, she finally left. I packed all of Kelly's belongings, including everything I had bought for her since she had lived off my money for 2 years. I texted her to pick up her things, and when she arrived, I handed them over without speaking. Later, Nat texted, calling me a jerk for keeping the gifts. Kelly also texted, calling me stingy. Angry, I sent her photos of the expensive engagement ring and vacation tickets I had bought to show what she missed out on because of Nat. Then, I blocked her. In September, Kelly showed up at my place looking awful and begged me to take her back. She admitted she had made a huge mistake. After we broke up, she got her own apartment, but realized how manipulative Nat was. Nat kept guilt-tripping her into giving her money, and eventually moved in with Kelly after getting evicted. Things got worse. Nat started using drugs, invited shady people over, and Kelly noticed cash and valuables, including her grandmother's necklace, were stolen. When she confronted Nat, Nat physically assaulted her, and 2 days later, Kelly was evicted because of Nat's behavior. Now homeless, jobless, and broke, Kelly apologized, saying she would do anything to get back together. I felt a sense of satisfaction and told her it was karma for choosing Nat over me. I asked her to leave, threatening to call the police if she didn't. Kelly told mutual friends, and they think I was too harsh given her situation. They suggest I apologize or even consider taking her back. Now, I'm conflicted. Should I apologize to keep the peace with my friends? Or am I justified in not taking her back or apologizing? AITA? Edit 1. Thanks for all your opinions and suggestions. I've decided to talk to Kelly once and for all and tell her to leave me alone. I'm going to apologize for taking pleasure in her misery, not to please my friends, but just because I want to get over with this as soon as possible. I've set up a meeting at a busy public place tomorrow. I also took the advice of my elder sister. I've always turned to her for advice. I'll update and let you guys know how the talk goes. I'm hoping to close this chapter of my life forever. Peace. OP is not an AH, and his being harsh is 100% justified. OP's ex-girlfriend is opportunistic, and OP decision to not reconcile with is in the right. Preferring mental peace over toxic relationship is the best choice. In fact, OP's ex is an entitled AH. So, I would rate her 2 out of 5 on the AH scale, and OP 0. Let's now move to another story from Sudden Traffic 9539, where OP demands that CL have no access to their newly born child because of her cold and dismissive behavior towards her. AITA, for telling my husband that his sister will not meet our baby if she does not start to respect me. First time here, but I really need an outside opinion. Bear with me. My husband's sister has been cold towards me for the past 2.5 years that I've known her. I feel that I have gone above and beyond to be kind to her and make her comfortable with me. She can be shy, which is his excuse for her behavior, but we'll get into that. She does not speak to me unless spoken to. Not a hi or a bye, even at my own apartment. When my husband and I eloped, I didn't get a congratulations from her. On my birthday, she called my husband to chat. He mentioned that we were on our way to dinner for my birthday. No happy birthday from her. When we found out that I was pregnant, she was the first person my husband told. I didn't hear from her. She came to visit us 3 weeks later. Again, walked into our apartment without acknowledging me, and did not congratulate me or ask about the pregnancy at all while she was here. To add to that, I was extremely sick with a condition called hyperemesis gravidarum. It's like morning sickness, but on steroids. I had been in the ER days prior and continued to vomit every hour. She was aware of this before coming over. There was no acknowledgement from her, and I was treated like I didn't exist. In the past, I have asked my husband if he was aware of any issues she had with me. Maybe I said or did something that she didn't like and didn't know. He said, "No, why would you think that?" I told him how I felt and mentioned the things above. This was before the pregnancy. He said that he was sorry that I felt that way and that he would talk to her about it. He also mentioned that she was a very shy person, so it is most likely unintentional. He's right, she is not the most outgoing person, but I can't just chalk it up to that. We've been in plenty of social settings together. I've seen how she greets and acknowledges other people, even strangers. She doesn't just lack manners or social cues because she's shy. I think it's a poor excuse. Anyway, he lets me know that they spoke, and she doesn't dislike me, and didn't realize that she was being rude to me, but will make a conscious effort to be more respectful going forward. The next time that we see her, we visit her and their brother at their place. I had a terrible headache, and their brother offered the second bed in the sister's room if I wanted to lay down. They live on campus, in a house where the rooms are set up dorm style, but she does not have a roommate. Before I could say anything, she gives him a side eye and says, no. I said, "No worries," and went to lay in his room, same setup, extra bed that was my husband's while he was in college. My husband told her that wasn't cool and asked her to apologize. She did, and she said she had just done some laundry and used the extra bed to dump her clean clothes, so that was the reason for her saying no, and it was not personal. I thanked her for apologizing and was happy to move on. I asked their brother for his opinion. He's a year younger than my husband, and him and I get along very well. He basically said that she's the only girl out of 4, so the family is used to her attitude and doesn't mind. For example, she will yell at them, call them names, demand things, hang up the phone on them when they can't fulfill her needs immediately, etc. Although my siblings and I didn't grow up treating each other that way. I know some do, so if they allow it, cool. But towards me, no thank you. The next time we saw her, which was most recent, is when she came over after finding out that I was pregnant. Her and my husband were spending a day together out the house. I was too sick to leave the bed, and I couldn't help but to send a text and let him know how I felt. I told him that I should not feel that way in my own home, especially at such a vulnerable time. I don't know if any of you are familiar with HG, but it is debilitating. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Later on that day, he asked if she could come in and apologize. In hindsight, I really wish that I would have taken them up on that offer, but in the moment, I was so overwhelmed physically, mentally, and emotionally that I told him it was not a good time for me. In the past, she has asked my husband to place Amazon orders for her because she doesn't have a Prime account. He told her that I have a Prime account, so he would relay the message. I would then place the order and text her the tracking info. I don't know if this is where her being shy comes into play, but it would be the same approach every time. She would call him directly, ask him, and he would say, "I'll ask OP. She has Prime, I do not." About a month after our last interaction, she called him to ask him to place an order. I was baffled. After knowing that I am very uncomfortable with how she treats me, she can't even send an apology text. Yet, how is she so comfortable asking me for favors? I told him exactly that, and he said he understands. He would ask her to reach out. A few more weeks pass and I get an email that reads, "Thank you for your order," from Amazon. I asked him if he placed the order on my phone, and he said, yes, she sent the money so I had to. I told him that I was not okay with him going behind my back to do something I was not comfortable with. He said that she asked him to do her a favor, not me. But really, she goes through him to avoid asking me. I told him that at this point my issue is no longer with how she treats me. I am okay with not seeing or speaking to each other moving forward. I feel like I've been begging her to be nice to me, and I'm done. My issue is now with him. He is responsible for making sure that his sister respects his wife, and he has done a poor job at that. AITA for telling my husband that if she doesn't want to respect me, that is okay, but when our baby comes, His sister will not be having a relationship with them? This may be a hot take, but I don't believe that anybody who disregards the well-being of the mother throughout her pregnancy should have access to the baby just because they're family. The other things I could let go of if she was empathic during this time. His other siblings check in on me and baby often and are very supportive and encouraging. I would have the same feelings towards any of my family members if they treated me or my husband that way. Sorry for such a long-winded post. Let me know if you have any questions that will give better context. Thank you. OP is not an AH here, rather her sister-in-law is an AH, the big one for being cold and dismissive towards OP, and now, OP's demand that her sister-in-law should not have access to her newly born child is justified. She is just setting boundaries to protect the future of her child. As for scores, I would rate OP's sister-in-law 3, OP's husband 2, and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the last story for this video. The story is from narrow_valuable_6330, and it revolves around the breakup of a couple during Halloween party. AITA for breaking up with my boyfriend for how he acted in a haunted house instead of supporting me during my disability. Throwaway for privacy. I, 22F, have been with my boyfriend, 24M, for 2 years. For some background, I am chronically ill and have a few issues that impact my ability to do activities that require a lot of standing and walking. I have a joint condition and a fainting condition. Typically, I use a wheelchair for outings like that. A few weeks ago, my boyfriend Mark told me that he and his friends had planned to go to a local amusement park for one of their Halloween nights, and he wanted me to come with him. There's an amusement park near our town that before they closed down for the winter, opened the park for the weekend nights as a haunted theme park. Decorations, fog machines, haunted houses, and scare actors. Something I loved doing before I got sick. While the park itself is wheelchair accessible during the main running, it isn't during their haunt nights. The haunt zones have steps, dips, tight spaces, sharp tight corners, low ceilings, and it's super dark. Not to mention a lot of it is done in fields, on gravel, or nailed together boards with cracks and gaps. And these zones are located in main areas you need to get through the park. Not something you can do in a wheelchair. Unfortunate, but not everything will be accessible. That's a fact of life. I thanked Mark for the offer but declined giving the above reasons. He told me that I could do without a wheelchair for a single night. We argued for a minute before he told me he had already bought a ticket for me and that I had to go. He didn't want to be the only one without his girlfriend there. I eventually gave up and agreed. The trip was awful. It didn't open till 8 and went till 12 a.m. and rained the entire time. I was freezing cold despite dressing in borderline winter clothes. My fingers were so cold they hurt. Mark never once offered me his extra coat. Because this was a popular holiday attraction, the lines were insane, so there was a ton of standing, something I can't handle with my fainting condition. My boyfriend refused to make his friends stop to give me breaks to sit, and he wouldn't stay back with me because he didn't want to miss out, so I had to kneel on the wet, muddy ground so I didn't pass out. Because of how uneven the ground was, transitions between concrete, gravel, grass, mud, the constant jostling and jolting made my hips, knees, and ankles hurt like hell. By the end of the night, I could barely walk. Mark wouldn't ask his friends to slow down and wouldn't hang back to walk with me, so he basically dragged me around trying to keep up with his friends. When I made any uncomfortable noises, he told me to quit trying to guilt him. On the car ride home, he told me that my constant complaining and inability to just relax and have fun ruined the vibes of the trip and made it look like we don't get along. I didn't get dropped off at home until about 1:30 in the morning. I ran a bath to soak my aching body and to seriously reconsider my relationship. Mark has never been the most accommodating of my disabilities. He started out caring and accommodating, but over time started acting like I was personally inconveniencing him. He never fully understood why I always felt so. He always urged me to leave my wheelchair at home when we went out, and at one point told me that me getting a service dog made him uncomfortable. I'm on a wait list. I got out of the bath and texted him telling him it was over and gave him a few reasons why. He didn't respond until noon the next day, calling me a bitch and saying that I was being dramatic. When I told my parents and brother what happened, they said that, while I can break up with whoever I want, that doesn't change the fact that I expect too much out of people. My family thinks that I expected too much from Mark. and that I was being dramatic just because he wasn't the most helpful. AITA? Edit to add. My family is the type who believes that disabilities aren't real, and that if you're chronically ill, all you need is yoga, Jesus, and more veggies, it'd live a completely normal, functioning life. OP is not an AH for breaking up with her boyfriend. OP's boyfriend is an AH, a big AH for accusing her of killing the vibe, despite knowing about her disability to walk. OP's reaction is justified, and she is not overreacting here. So, for scores, I would rate OP's boyfriend 2 and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Welcome to a very brutal pro-revenge story from Destruction Escapist. I hope this won't backfire, but I believe I did not break any law, so here it goes. Sorry for the long post. Some background first. Since I was a kid, I was fascinated in computers and electronics. During school, I had no social life. I just stayed at home and was learning stuff. I was going to generic high school that should prepare you for university without any specialization. But there were few people with same interests as me, and our IT teacher was really supportive of us. When I finished high school, I already had a job as a programmer and had a few years of experience in the field. I also was experienced with electronics, and even worked on a few contracts for the factory in town, involving creating machines for them. Other engineers came up with an idea how to machine will work. My job was to put their motors, sensor, wire it up, and write program for the PLC to control it. I moved to a big city and started university, so I lost my programming job in my city. I was going looking for a part-time job, while living off my parents' support. Things changed when my friend got an escape game voucher for 5 people for his birthday and took me with him. The escape game had cool magic stuff, like you placed objects in a shelf, and all pictures in the room fall off the walls, etc. While we were there to solve puzzles, I was mostly interested in these magic things, making theories about how they made them, and thinking how I would do it. When the game was over, I saw for a moment their technical room, and at this point I was like, I want to work here. I sent them my CV, and as I was overqualified for this job, I was accepted after first interview. I was young, naive, and stupid, so they just used me. My hourly rate was after tax as equivalent of $8.50. To put it in comparison, cashier at big store here makes roughly $6.50 plus benefits. First few months were awesome. I was paid for doing my hobby, and the owner loved me, as his previous tech guy, referred to as tech moron now on, was, compared to me, just dumb. I'm not bragging, I swear. He did not come up with almost any original design. He just found something on the internet and was skilled enough to read the schematics and somewhat copy it. But he had big gaps in his knowledge. Once he told me that I can't build a battery-operated circuit that will be powered while the battery is charging, as this would cause the battery to explode. When I told them about charging regulators and how it's not an issue with his phone or laptop, he just told me I was hired to help him and to f*** off. Over the time, Tech Moron started to realize that I'm just smarter than him and his ego could not handle it. So he decided his only now from now on is to make my life a hell. For example, the owner tasked me with replicating device that they already have in one game, as he wanted to put it into another one. I spent week just by messaging Tech Moron, asking him for the schematics and source code, calling him, and he just never replied. Then I decided to f*** him. I came up with an improved design and built it. When I was shoving it at the next meeting to the owner, who was very happy with it, Tech Moron just yelled at me for not using his design and wasting time on reinventing wheel. After some time, the owner realized what was going on and hired another tech guy, Tech Senior from now on. But he cannot fire Tech Moron, as he had all important source codes and designs at his laptop, and because of bad contract, it was not property of the escape game company. Little did we know that in the future, he will not hand over most of the designs and codes, and we will end up rewriting that from scratch. The company was also franchising. We just took a game we already had running, made an exact copy, and installed it in another location. We then provided support, while they were paying us license fees, usually a small percentage of their profits. The owner was a typical manager who thought 9 women can deliver a baby in a month, and it showed as the company grew. Eventually, Tech Senior was made my boss, as he had much more experience in electronics, while I was more oriented on programming and on-site support for game masters if something broke. We didn't give a fuck about Tech Moron, as at this point, he just showed up once a month, did almost no work, criticized all we already did, and had working and went home. Things were going really well, so we hired few electronic student to help us. The building department, which was making props, like special wooden table that we could hide our magic into, also grew. Things were looking really good, until one meeting about new franchise client. The owner told us what he needs. We, tech guys, talked to props guys, went over all the requirements, and told him we need 10 weeks for it. Well, 8, but we always accounted for going sideways, as this date will be on the contract. Usual stuff in healthy company. Next week, next meeting. He told us that the client does not want to wait, and he put 5 weeks in the contract. His reasoning was we are doing the same stuff as before, and now have more people, so it will go faster. We worked hard, like really hard. There were weeks when I just went home for 8 hours to take shower and sleep for a bit, then went back to the workshop to work on stuff. It was hard, but we managed to finish in time, and I got some sweet money in overtime. But this was a mistake. Now we showed him that what he wants is possible. So the next contract went over the exact same deadline. More overtime. I remember having almost no social life, just working the whole week, sometimes sleeping at the workshop, and being stressed as f. Then, every Friday I just went to a pub with a few friends, totally wasted myself to relieve the stress, and slept through the whole weekend. Then comes a Monday and we start over. Eventually I went from I love this job to I don't give a f, and I wasn't the only one. Our performance dropped and we started missing deadlines. Did the owner account for it in the contracts? No. Repetition makes perfection. This time you can do it faster, was his reasoning. And he just kept signing more and more contracts, dumping the shit on us. I remember the one meeting when he asked us about status of Project D as the deadline was next week. Well, we did not even start working on this, as we had our hands full with Project C, which was started later because we did not finish Projects A and B in time. This is how far it went. Deposits from new contracts were used to pay fines for old contracts. At this meeting, I realized I just have enough. Of course, our job was not only franchising. We had our own games that needed to be maintained, and we were doing that all the time alongside that franchising hell. What was the biggest issue with all games was the control software. It was a shitload of simple-purpose scripts driving all the Raspberry Pis and Arduinos in the game. But it had one UI presented to the game master, so he could control all the props in-game, override them, etc., at least in theory. But oh boy, it was buggy like hell. Sometimes not working at all. Sometimes you wanted to shine light on object, to give the players a hint, but instead it opened doors to the next level, etc. It was no universal, simple requests, required massive changes. Lots of overrides were not implemented correctly. One day, the owner finally agreed to my demands and allowed me to rewrite all of that. It took me few months, but I created Universal Engine that could handle all the game designers were asking us to do, was easy to expand, had error protection and recovery tasks. Now, if one prop stopped responding, you just opened the debug page and clicked restart. This was a game changer, as previously the game master had to switch off the power, and sometimes that was not possible during the game. And my biggest achievement, I created easy scripting language which was used to describe the game workflow. The game master now had a load of working, controls, and option to interrupt predefined tasks and change the flow. But that barely happened, as the game was now almost automatic, and he was there just to give hints. I was not comfortable running this software on the Raspberry Pi that was there for the previous control, and I wanted a better hardware for that. My request was always denied by the owner, but the games manager wanted the new software working ASAP. To this point, we were always just testing it from my laptop. So I decided to lend them few PC. Some time ago, friend from a big corporate pulled a load of Dell Optiplex workstations from eScrap. They were working fine, had Intel i5 CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, decent onboard graphics, DisplayPort, USB 3.0, fully working computer. You could buy them refurbished for about $200. The company just had no use for them, and nobody wanted to go over selling them, so they just dumped them. I had a stack of 20 of them at home, just collecting dust. I took few of them to my work, and the boss agreed we will settle it later, so I just emailed him list of all of my HW that was used in the games. 5 PCs, some Wi-Fi routers, old tables, some monitors, and other stuff I had collected mostly from e-waste, fixed it, and had no use for it. Of course I did not tell them I got that for free, and was expecting them to pay me for it. Fast forward, I was fed up with the franchising deadlines and got few job offers that made me realize my real price, and that I was an abused young kid in his 20s, working for almost nothing. But I was waiting. In the next month, my software was deployed in the remaining games. Tech Moron was out of the picture for few months now. Tech Senior had some programming knowledge and was able to use my scripting language, but had very little understanding about the insides of the complex engine I wrote, which was now being developed for over a year. I had results, I was important, and I had demands. I scheduled a meeting with the owner, where I wanted to present the list of all the wrong things and what I want to do about it. It all came to a single argument. I'm not happy here, but you need me, so you will fix these issues and give me a raise, or I'm leaving. And I will stand my ground. Recruiter from a big IT company I wanted to work for messaged me on LinkedIn few weeks prior, and I already went on the interview, so I had an escape plan prepared. The future looked bright, and I was ready to make it happen. The day of the meeting came up. I was in a good mood until there was a nasty accident in the workshop. I don't want to post any details, as this would identify me in a second, but this even is important. I, being the youngest one here, not even responsible for the mess, was tasked with cleaning it up. I had an argument with the workshop manager about me being a programmer and not a radioactive waste cleaning lady, but in the end, I just broke and started cleaning. Halfway through it, almost vomiting from the smell, I just snapped. None of this would happen in a decent IT company. I went to my office, packed my stuff, and just sat there just playing games, waiting for the owner. When he showed up, I told him about all the issues. He argued at some. But when we got to the end, I just told him that today was the last straw, and that I'm leaving right now. I was employed as an independent contractor, so they could save some money on taxes, and my contract had nothing about my time there. I just told him that I will send him download link for all the files I have, as the contract stated that they are owned by the company. He begged me to stay for one more month as they were behind on many deadlines. I just said I will think about it and left. On my way home, I called the recruiter and told him I accept the job and can start next month. Next day, I just made a big archive of about 150 GBs of files, backups, etc. that I had, uploaded it to my server, and emailed the link to the owner and tech senior. I then spent the next 2 weeks in bed, watching Netflix and ignoring calls. For the last week, I showed up to help clear up some things, hand over my projects, asked about the computers and other stuff I lent them, he told they will pay for it, and then left. I was lucky as hell. The next month, the corona happened, and a month later, they were forced to close all games by government, making their income go almost zero overnight. This, I believe, was the reason they never paid me for my stuff. Even I repeatedly asked until I got tired of it. Time went by until a few weeks ago when I saw the tech senior was looking for a new job. I messaged him and we talked. He told me that they survived by doing private events for companies until they could open again a month ago. All the other tech guys except him were let go, but he managed. Until he got into an argument with the owner. He did not tell me much details, be the owner wanted something either impossible or expensive as When he presented cheap alternative, the owner just snapped and fired him on the spot. He tried to reason with him about not firing him until he can teach his successor and find a new job in the meantime, but he was fired on spot. Week later, I got a call from the owner. He hired the younger tech guys he fired during COVID and wanted me to come and answer their questions, mostly about the engine I wrote. I agreed, but as we were planning the meeting, I was suspecting he just wants me to do it for free. When I brought up the hourly rate, he just told me we will solve that later, hang up and never called again. The day of the meeting came. I was waiting in my car outside the workshop, waiting if he will call where am I, but he did not. Few days later, I parked next to warehouse where all the games were held, with a Yagi antenna in my car. Surprise, the Wi-Fi routers I lent them were still there, with the password unchanged. I connected to the Wi-Fi and poked around the network. All the PCs that I lent them to run the software on were still there, still running the Linux server I installed there, and looking at the logs, they were still used to control the games. I wrote a script that runs on boot, rolls a dice, and then deleted the whole drive. I was connected to my Wi-Fi router, making changes to my computer, formatting my drives. Then I drove away. A few days ago, I got a call. Apparently, when the Monday shift came in, the control system for one of the game was not responding. The browser was showing timeout. They decided to reset power for the whole rack, where all the PCs were multiple times, hoping it would start up, because turning it off and on again always works. When they decided to stop trying, they find out that all 8 games were dead. The new old tech guys figured out that the drives probably died, but had no knowledge about my system, so they could not set it up. When I asked about Tech Senior, the owner made some excuse about him quitting and not wanting to work for them anymore. I told him I was happy to help. In the end, this used to be my dream job. But I now work for a big company, I don't have much time, and it's expensive. I can come over to set it up, but my hourly rate now is $150. He talked me down to $100, which was still about twice as much as I make now. When I arrived, I checked the PCs, pulled out the email I sent him a year ago, and told him that these serial numbers match these on the labels, and told him I'm happy to find my lost stuff, took first PC, and took it to my car. We had an argument. I told him that I'm either taking all that stuff, or he is paying me something over $2,400. He wanted to call police, but I had the proof this equipment was mine. He eventually agreed and I got to work. All my software was still in the bit bucket, even with the few modifications Tech Senior managed to make, alongside with all the config file and scripts with the game workflow that Tech Senior was periodically modifying and backing up. So it was pretty easy job. I got it all working, and then stayed for a few more hours, explaining some stuff to the tech guys. I printed the invoice and left, tired but satisfied. Yesterday, a nice sum of about $3,600 landed in my bank account. From what they told me, all 8 games were dead for 3 days. Each game costs between $80 and $120, takes 1 hour to finish, and half an hour is needed for preparation. So there are 12 slots every day, averaging on $9,600 income per day when fully booked. This is of course just the income, profit after paying all the rent, wages, electricity, consumables used in games, etc. is much lower, but I don't know how much. Before Corona, about 80% of slots was booked during week and 100% during weekends. I just like to think I made him lost $23,000, not counting the angry customers which were forced to reschedule, dollars just because he was a jerk. If he paid me for my stuff or did not fire his only tech guy, none of this would have happened. TL, DR. My boss was a jerk, made us work insane overtime, and did not pay me for equipment I agreed to sell to him, then fired everybody who knew how his business was running. I then decided to take over my equipment he stole, halting his business and costing him thousands. The revenge was really brutal. The owner's mismanagement and disregards for OP's concerns backfired, leading to crumbling down of his business empire. Had the company's owner paid what he owed to OP, he would have not faced such grave consequences, and he would have not lost such a large sum of money. The revenge was beyond perfect and deeply satisfying. The lesson we learn from the story is never mess with employees. Let's now jump on to the next story from Seagull Fan Club. I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life 20 plus years ago, and I just made sure it stayed ruined. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake, then 23, through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move to the opposite side of the United States for graduate school, and I had already been making plans to move with friends, only a 90-minute drive away from where he was moving to. We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate, both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends with them as well. Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him to hang out on weekends. He was renting a house with 2 roommates, also in his program. We were young, so money was tight, but we had fun, went on taco dates, and spent a lot of time at his house, where he was breeding and selling small animals. Jake was an animal sciences PhD student, so being around animals was normal, and I loved it. I met and became friends with his advisor's wife, Mary, mid-50s, who worked in administration at the university. She is a lovely woman, and I would often have lunch with her when I went over on weekends. Jake was a teaching assistant, TA, and I met other people in the program and made friends with them faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, lying in bed together, in a state of some undress, and he said out of the blue, He was concerned I'd been gaining weight, and it made it harder for him to be attracted to me. There was no concern about my health. It was all about him finding me unattractive. I sat up and said, well, then maybe you should make sure there is better food for me to eat than crackers and cheese when I come up on weekends. Even at 23, I didn't take that kind of BS. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him 2 years earlier and still wore the same size clothes, about a US size 6 to 8. I wasn't going to engage in a fight about it after all. It was his problem, not mine. So I asked him calmly, "So, what is your solution to this?" He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I guess that you should try to lose weight." And I said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that. So what are you going to do about it?" He said, "Well, I guess nothing. I wanted to let you know how I feel." And I said, "Cool, thank you." I put my clothes back on, went to sleep, and drove home the next day as usual. We keep dating, and about 3 months later, he called me and said he wanted to break up after close to 3 years. The reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about science." He felt like he couldn't have a conversation with me about his work because he didn't have to use common names for animals instead of scientific ones. I said, "Well, that's rubbish. What's the real reason?" He said it was the real reason. He came to see me a month later to return something of mine, and I confronted him, demanding the real reason. He finally admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students, let's call her Meg, a 19-year-old. He was then 26 and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave. My roommate threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't go, and he left. It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to stunned laughter. I'd met Meg a few times, and at one point, she was at his house for a BBQ and spilt something all over her pants. Jake asked me if I could loan her some sweats. I couldn't because I was a size 8, and she was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that, at all. But the point is, I realized he made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him because he was a coward. He clearly liked a big gal. Although, when he'd said those things to me about my weight, it was 1 a.m. I lived about 95 miles away, and we had just had sex, so I don't know how he thought this would go. Even in hindsight, it perplexes me. Did he think I was going to break up with him, storm off into the night, and drive for an hour and a half? Anyway, I emailed his roommates. It was the early 2000s. It's how you communicated anything you didn't want to say on the phone. I wanted to let them know we'd broken up, and that they were always lovely to me, and thanked them for being friends. They both admitted they knew about Meg, and were the ones to demand that Jake tell me, or they would. That's when he broke up with me with the lame you don't understand science excuse. One of his roommates, a super nice, super cute guy named George, offered to help me get a few things still at their house that he had collected for me away from around the house. He suggested I come up for the weekend. We go out and drink and have a good time. All the things Jake didn't want to waste money on, and I said sure. So I went up, and George let me into the house while Jake was gone. I took photos of all of his animals because while I might not be a PhD student, I paid attention and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it. It was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $25 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of an animal not allowed in the state, which was in a tank right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with George. We stumbled in early, around midnight, so Jake and Meg, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and George practically carrying me. I spent the night in George's room. He was a total gentleman, but made sure to leave the room and parade past them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Jake said I didn't have to act like a whore in front of him as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair while George beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Meg looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said, "Have fun with my leftovers," and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud hookup and a few juvenile insults were my revenge. It was not. The next day I had my photos developed, the good old days, and called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the animals in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have at all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Jake wasn't well liked by his peers in his program or by his roommates, but I was. George had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that a TA was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone who they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Meg. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. George and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Jake's entitled BS. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been emailing with him, and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent that to Mary. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she made sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Jake's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later, George called me, giddy, to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Meg was there when it happened, and told the officials that, as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Jake, and that they were all legal. That put George and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic, illegal to have in the state, under nearly any circumstances, animal. Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate in the house. The animals were all in communal areas, and the officers stayed there for a few hours, and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate. George and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Meg apparently couldn't get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find him. Remember, no cell phones yet. It was a good day. The only animals they left were some guppies in a fish tank. Now, PhD students need grant money to do research, and a large part of animal studies funding comes from the federal government. Jake had just gotten an EPA grant right around when he broke up with me. So I called the EPA and asked how I would report that a person with a federal grant was being investigated for illegally harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost his EPA grant and had to make restitution on what had already been used, close to $30,000. He would never be able to get another federal grant. He avoided jail time on the state charges, since all the animals were in good health, but lost all his breeding animals, worth thousands of dollars, since they were collected for safekeeping during the investigation when the 2 illegal animals were taken. In the end, he owed a $15,000 fine, and the 2 animals went to a nearby nature center. For years, I would stop by if I was in the area to visit them. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with a student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide the relationship with Meg and was so stupidly self-assured. He didn't even wait the 4 weeks until she would have been done with his class to start publicly dating her. By the university rules, he would have been in the clear to date her, not being her teacher anymore, and she would just have to avoid any classes he was a TA in. It never fails to make me laugh. After a few months, I emailed his sisters and told them I missed them, because Jake broke up with me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt weird contacting them. The girls told me he told the family I broke up with him because of the distance. I forwarded them emails that Jake wrote after the breakup, talking about how he fell for Meg, and he was sorry about it, but it was true. I couldn't keep up with him academically, and it made him attracted to Meg. Jake managed to convince his dad to pay for 1 more year of school so he could get a master's instead of a PhD. And while I stayed in contact with his sisters and brother, via email and then social media, I largely let it all go. I got even, made some friends. Mary became like an auntie to me, and I went on with life. I went on to get a master's degree myself. What was my specialty? Helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to lay people. You know, us dummies who can't remember all the scientific names. I swear, it happened by accident, not design, but I love it. and I work with everyone from small-town doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies to museums to state and federal governments to film and TV producers. I travel a lot and speak and get to learn a lot of cool things about our planet and how things work. I knew through his siblings that Jake and Meg got married and had 2 kids. Meg dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant. Jake went back to breeding animals. Every once in a while, his sisters or brother would tell me something over for lunch or via text, but we had our own relationship that exists outside of him. Apparently, when I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, he loudly complained at a co-ed bridal shower that all of his siblings still were my friends, and didn't make an effort to embrace his now wife Meg. Apparently, the sister just laughed and said, "I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers." This is how Jake's parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended, 10 years after we broke up. Jake never found out I was behind reporting him to the state, and in the end, I didn't lie about a single thing, except maybe exaggerating a drunken makeout session with George, who is now a successful and tenured professor with a lovely wife and daughters. Fast forward about 20 years to a few weeks ago. I was at a university giving a lecture to a room of 250 undergrad and graduate students. In the end, I was mingling with the student afterwards, and I hear a voice say, "Hey OP, long time no see." And I realize it's Jake, and I didn't change the expression on my face at all. I was completely shocked, and my instinct was to play dumb. So I said, "I'm sorry, help me out. Have we met at another workshop or lecture?" He looked incredulous and said, "It's me, Jake." And I said, "I can't place you, but I would love to figure it out." Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake." I guess I blocked you out and said, "Well, lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach out and hug me. I was happy to leave it there, with the satisfaction of him seeing me as a guest lecturer in the science department of a major university when he was just in the audience. The department chair and faculty who had invited me to speak took me out to dinner. And while there, one of them said, "So, you know Jake?" I said, "I did it over 20 years ago," being vague about how. She went on to tell me he had been there for an interview for a teaching position and had spent a few days there observing, and they were likely going to hire him. I couldn't control it. I scoffed. When they all looked at me, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just shocked he's teaching after what happened at University X." They said what happened, and I said he was sleeping with a 19-year-old student when he was 26. And he had to leave the program without a PhD because he couldn't afford to stay after losing his scholarship. The 3 people I was with all looked at each other like they knew they had a problem and said, "Wow, we'll have to look into that and change the subject." My old friend Mary, retired a year or 2 now, but still friendly with her old colleagues, called me this weekend to say a friend at the university let her know someone had called doing a background check about Jake and they pulled his file, which included being fired, leaving the program with a lower degree, and the complaint letters from over 20 years ago about his conduct. Mary's name had been on it with her husband listed as the faculty advisor, so she thought she'd like to know. As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals. I guess his dad paid for a decent lawyer to get the record expunged after the charges were reduced, and he paid the fines, so it doesn't show up on a standard background check. I don't think he's going to get that job. So I will return to my life, content that the universe comes through sometimes, especially if you give it a little nudge now and then. The best revenge is when you don't have to do anything wrong. You just have to help direct knowledge to the right places. If there is anything I can impart to any young women and men reading this, as I shimmy happily into my now size 10 pants, it's that if someone who is supposed to love you complains about your weight or looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, not yours. And maybe it's time to check out what they are doing behind your back or simply move on. Remember though, it is their flaw, not yours. If Jake hadn't been a coward and tried to make me break up with him and just ended things with me in a mature way, I might not have found out about Meg and turned his own wickedness back on himself. The revenge was brilliantly orchestrated and brutally executed that shattered OP's ex-boyfriend's reputation and academic career. OP's ex-boyfriend's own actions, inappropriate relationship with his student, and his illegal harboring of endangered animals precipitated to destroy him. OP did nothing. She just reported. The final blow came when OP's engulfed his prospects of job after 20 years of their breakup. The revenge brutal, cool, and deeply satisfying. The revenge was brilliantly orchestrated and brutally executed, shattering OP's ex-boyfriend's reputation and academic career. OP's ex-boyfriend's own actions, an inappropriate relationship with his student, and illegal harboring of endangered animals led to his downfall. OP did nothing. She just reported the incidents. The final blow came after 20 years when OP engulfed his ex's prospects of a job. The revenge was brutal, cool, and deeply satisfying. Welcome to a very complicated AITA story from Empty Chemist 929. AITA for telling my sister, I don't know if I love her after finding out about her 5-year affair. My sister, 32, moved in with me because she got pregnant 5 months ago from what she claimed was a one-night stand. I love my sister, so of course I took her in. My husband is overseas for 6 more months, so it was nice to have her around because I care about her very much. On Monday, I came home and saw my sister and a strange woman in a screaming match on my doorstep. I obviously didn't know what was happening, but I saw the woman poking my pregnant sister's shoulder, so I intervened. I sent my sister inside, and she begged me to send the woman away. I didn't understand what was going on, but I wanted the altercation to end for everyone's sake, so I told the woman as much. Then she started screaming, asking me if I was also sleeping with her husband. I was like, WTF? And then she basically revealed that my sister had been having an affair with her husband for 5 years. 5 years. She had everything printed out. Chats, photos, emails, receipts. It was disturbing to see, and I didn't want to go through it all. But a few things were established. My sister knew about his wife. She knew she was the mistress and liked it. This woman was a stay-at-home mom to their 4 kids, one of whom has a severe disability from a car accident. Her husband knew about my sister's pregnancy and even took her on a baby moon to celebrate it. The affair had been going on the entire time, with my sister believing he would eventually leave his wife for her. My sister had fully embraced the role of being the other woman and was emotionally invested in their relationship, despite his repeated lies about leaving his wife. I told the woman I was very sorry and that I obviously didn't know, but I asked her to leave because this wasn't going anywhere, and I didn't want the neighbors to call the police. She was furious but gave me her number on a post-it, begging me not to let her husband stay at my house. I assured her that no man was stepping foot in my home. My sister was begging me not to believe the woman, calling her a vindictive ex-wife. I told her, all right then, let's look up the marriage online. Let's see if a motion for dissolution of marriage was ever submitted. We fought hard. My sister kept saying I would never understand, and that they loved each other, but he just couldn't leave his wife, blah blah blah. I called her dumb and naive. The next day, I told her she could stay here because I didn't want her to become a financial burden on that woman in any way. But I also told her that, right now, I didn't want to engage with her. My sister asked me if I still loved her, and I told her honestly, right now, I can't say I do. I will always help my nephew and not endanger you. But I can't like you because you've shown me you're not a trustworthy person. I told her I didn't trust her not to try anything with my husband, and I didn't trust her with anything at all. So I made her sign a tenants agreement. She's been begging me to forgive her, and I told her there's nothing to forgive. I just don't know who she is anymore. Update. First, I'd like to clarify a few things. I am not going to tell my sister to get rid of the baby. That's not my place, and I would never suggest such a thing. Also, I am not going to install tracking software on her phone or demand access to all her devices. That's invasive and wrong. I've been thinking a lot, and while I can't say that I don't love my sister, it's very hard to feel that love right now. I don't know who she is anymore. It's not just that she lied to me. It's what she did, and how convinced she is that she was justified because they were in love. She's brought chaos into my home that I opened up to her. I'm deeply disappointed in her, and I just don't like her at the moment. I'm letting her stay with me because I don't want her to become dependent on him. I don't think he's a good man either, and as a social worker, I've seen these scenarios too many times. My sister is already deluded. I don't need to open the door to a dependency that's also financial. Now, onto the update. I haven't been punishing my sister, but I've been treating her like a roommate. This is driving her crazy. She's begging me to go back to how things were before, but I can't. I told her that I need time, and that things can't just return to normal overnight. She tried to explain how it all happened. She admitted that she always knew he was married, but believed she could tell how unhappy he was, and felt he deserved to be happy. They met at a bar a few weeks after his son's accident. He told her that his wife hadn't touched him since it happened, and that he was about to explode. I asked her why she would involve herself with a married man, knowing the hurt it would cause. She said she wanted to be a wife and a good mom, and that included his kids. She had hoped he would divorce his wife so they could all move on and finally be happy together. I just stared at her, unable to comprehend how she could rationalize her actions. A few days later, he appeared at our house, claiming he had left his wife and wanted to be with my sister. I told him to leave immediately or I would call the police. My sister was furious with me, accusing me of ruining her chance at happiness. I made it clear to her, if he comes over again, I will evict her. She's free to date anyone she wants, but not under my roof. I also told her that if she plans to have him around after the baby is born, she'll need to find her own place. Word has gotten around our community about the affair. While we were grocery shopping, a woman even spat on my sister. Many of her friends have cut ties with her, calling her a homewrecker. Some are married themselves and don't want her near their husbands. I haven't said "I told you so" even once. We unexpectedly ran into his wife at a local cafe. My sister wanted to apologize and suggested that maybe they could all have a good relationship for the sake of the kids. The wife laughed coldly and said, "You made your choices. Now live with them. Don't expect me to make this easier for you." My sister is devastated and has been lying in bed ever since. I'm taking care of her physical needs, making sure she eats, stays hydrated, and attends her prenatal appointments. But I can't bring myself to comfort her emotionally. I just don't have it in me right now. Second and final update. My sister just won't stop talking about him. Every day, it's the same story. Their perfect future together. The apartment they're moving into. How everything will be great once his divorce is done. She's completely lost in this delusion, acting like none of the lies and betrayal matter. I can't stand it. She made him write me letters. Yes, actual letters. As if that's going to magically make me approve of him. She leaves them around the house, thinking that if I just read them, I'll suddenly understand how sorry he is and how much he loves her. I haven't responded to a single one. It's ridiculous. I told her over and over that I don't want anything to do with him, but she keeps pushing, as if she can wear me down. It's beyond frustrating. Then came the talk of moving in together. She sat me down and asked for my blessing, telling me how important it was to her that I support their relationship. She actually wanted me to meet him, to give him a chance. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's when I drew the line. I told her flat out, if she moves in with him, I'm done. I told her I would go low contact, that I wouldn't be part of their life, and that she's on her own if she goes through with this. If she wanted my support, she had to leave him, full stop. For a moment, I thought she was finally getting it. She showed me screenshots from his ex-wife. The ex had pretended she wanted him back, and this guy fell for it immediately. He told her how much he missed her, how my sister was a mistake, how he wanted to fix things with his family. My sister was crushed. She came to me with the screenshots, crying, and I thought, for a couple of days, that maybe, just maybe, she would finally see him for who he really is. I was hopeful. But then, as usual, he wormed his way back in. He told her he only said those things because he was afraid his ex would take the kids away. And of course, she bought it. Now she's actively moving in with him, packing up her things and making all these plans like nothing happened. The screenshots? Forgotten? The lies? Excused. She's determined to be with him no matter what, and I am done. I told her I'm not helping her anymore. No more driving her to appointments, no more checking on her, nothing. I'm not going to pretend everything's okay while she's diving headfirst into this disaster. Now, I barely talk to her. If she asks where the tea is, I'll tell her. If she wants to know if there's milk left, I'll answer. But that's it. I'm emotionally cut off, and I told her straight. I'll be here if things fall apart, if she's in danger, but I am not going to be a part of this train wreck. She's on her own now. The community backlash hasn't slowed down either. Everywhere we go, people are whispering, staring, and judging. They're not just looking at her, they're looking at me too. People know she's living with me, and I've started hearing comments at work about why I haven't completely cut her off. It's affecting my life now, and I just can't carry her mistakes anymore. Her friends? All gone. The ones who were married have cut ties completely. She's isolated herself, but instead of waking up, she's clinging harder to him, holding on to this fantasy that everything will work out. But I'm done caring. She's made her choice, and now she has to live with the fallout. This is the final update because I'm finished. I'm done trying, done caring, done dealing with the mess she's made. She can have her life with him, but I'm not going to be part of it. OP is not an AH for setting boundaries. Despite all that OP's sister did, OP took her in and provided essential support, and she cannot be an AH for refusing to enable the toxic relationship. OP's frustration and emotional detachment from her sister is understandable and reasonable because her sister has been continuously making poor choices. OP's actions fall under the umbrella of tough love. As for OP's sister, she is a big a-hole for making such a mean choice and expecting so much from a man who impregnated her without leaving his first wife. So, I would give her a 2.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. And that man is the biggest AH for playing 2 women. And I would give him 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump onto the next story from quirky_bad_499. During our date night, I saw my wife dancing with another man and I got mad. AITA? My wife and I went salsa dancing for date night the other night, something we rarely get to do since having our first baby 18 months ago. With no family nearby to help with childcare and babysitters being expensive, it was only our second time going out alone since our child was born. We were having a great time, but at one point I went to the washroom. I was gone for no more than 5 minutes, and when I came back, I saw her on the dance floor dancing with another man. I felt it was really disrespectful and got upset. I stood there watching, and when she saw me, I threw my hands up like, "What the hell?" She just smiled and kept dancing with him. So, I walked over, tapped the guy on the shoulder, and he immediately stopped and apologized. After he left, my wife got really mad, called me controlling, and spent the rest of the evening sitting at the bar, sulking. I told her I thought it was disrespectful to dance with someone else while on a date with me, but she wasn't having it. AITA? Edit. Many are saying this is normal for salsa dancing, especially in social halls. In this case, this was not a social dance hall. People dancing with their partners were not frequently switching partners. It was more of a club setting. So, she would have been spotted by herself and approached by a man to dance with her. She did not have to accept the dance, in my opinion. She thinks it was harmless. Edit 2. I talked to my wife. She has doubled down and said I completely overreacted and needlessly ruined our night. She admitted that the guy dancing with her told her she was beautiful and flirted with her and that she was flattered. When I asked if she told him she was married, she said she didn't because she didn't have time to. I had returned from the washroom by then. I am very upset by this and I don't know where to go from here. Sorry guys for the information drip. It is hard to type everything out while looking after my toddler. Some more clarification, particularly around communicating boundaries. I have always communicated my expectations and boundaries with her. We never had a conversation that included this particular scenario. Would you dance with someone else and allow them to flirt with you if I stepped away for 5 to 10 minutes while we were on a date together? But we have discussed boundaries and how we expect to conduct ourselves when out without the other. She has had girls' nights out prior to our child's birth, and she always told me if someone had approached her and how she'd handled it. It was never an issue. We were always on the same page. This is the first time she downplays crossing boundaries, which were previously agreed upon, and providing me with half-truths, unless I ask. When I address those concerns, she says I am overreacting. Edit 3. My wife chatted again about this tonight. As many of you have suggested, I asked my wife how she would feel if she came back from the bathroom and found me dancing with another woman, someone I likely asked to dance, since it's less common for women to approach men. She admitted she would feel jealous and wouldn't want me to do that. When I pointed out the hypocrisy, she argued that it's different because, in her view, accepting a dance is not the same as a man actively seeking out a woman to dance with. I disagreed, saying that if it's acceptable for her, it should be the same for me. She responded that if I ever did that, it would lead to a major fight, and she'd accuse me of cheating. Her reasoning is that, as a man, I would have pursued the woman, whereas as a woman, she is simply accepting an offer and can control the meaning behind it. I think it's BS. OP is not an AH, rather his wife is being cheap by dancing with another man on their rare date night. Her double standard is exposed when she admitted that she would feel jealous if the roles were reversed. So, I would rate OP 0 and OP's wife 2 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from humble_donut_39. AITA for cutting ties with my mom and grandma after they lied about a COVID test and caused a COVID super spreader at our wedding. TLDR. My mom and grandma lied about a COVID test, and as a result, 1 by 3 of our guests are sick, our honeymoon was ruined, and my relationships with both women may be unsalvageable. Apologies in advance for a long post. I am really struggling emotionally to process and move past the events of the last 1.5 weeks surrounding our wedding. Not sure what I'm looking for, other than a platform to just get this all out there, because it's weighing heavily on me and my heart is broken. We just got back from our honeymoon in Mexico, which we spent a year saving for, and which was ruined after we tested positive for COVID while on the trip, as a result of decisions made by my mom and grandma, which I will detail below. About a year ago, my maternal grandma asked her cousin to officiate our wedding, without asking me first. This was someone with whom I had no relationship and had only met once prior. I had no desire for him to officiate our wedding, but went along with it, because in our family, grandma gets what grandma wants, or there's hell to pay. In fact, if you cross her, she will cry in her room, post something nasty about you on Facebook, and then write you off until you apologize, even if you've done nothing wrong. Spoilers. Fast forward to 1 week before our wedding. We learned that the cousin and our officiant and his wife had been exposed to COVID, and they were on their way to my grandma's house to stay for the week leading up to the wedding. My out-of-state parents and brother were staying there as well, and my dad and brother made the decision to get out of there to avoid getting sick and came to stay with my fiancé and me. We all voiced our concerns and made it clear to my mom and grandma that it was a bad idea to host people who had had a COVID exposure a few days before our wedding and were met with the most pathetic display of immaturity and selfishness by my grandmother and mom. My grandma started crying and saying they would all boycott our wedding if we were that worried about COVID, which in 2024 is just a cold. Absolutely zero attempt was made to acknowledge our concerns about public health at our own event. For some additional backstory, my maternal grandmother has always acted this way, and all 4 of her children blindly give in to her antics, but especially my mom. And all of them have displayed an extremely frustrating denial of science, which has been gotten worse with the political conflict swirling in our family with the upcoming election. Anyway, my fiancé and I insisted that both our officiant and his wife take a COVID rapid test before we would allow them to come to the wedding. I contacted the venue and had a backup officiant lined up. I personally gave my mom 2 rapid tests and asked her make sure both the officiant and his wife tested negative on Friday morning, the day of the rehearsal dinner. My mom texted me, "The lepers are clean." I called her and asked point blank, "Mom, do you swear that both our officiant and his wife tested negative?" And she swore to me that they had. So I called the venue and cancelled the backup officiant, and we went ahead with the wedding weekend. Everything went perfectly. Our wedding was everything I dreamed. The only tainted memories I will carry with me forever are the ones of my grandma acting cold and standoffish to me at our rehearsal dinner and the entire wedding day because I had the audacity to insult her. I'll never forget the way she treated me. Fast forward to the Monday after the wedding. We were headed to the airport to fly to Mexico for our honeymoon and caught wind from my mom that my grandma had come down with a cold. I told her to make sure she tests for COVID, as that would be the obvious assumption for anyone with 2 brain cells. We landed in Mexico and were just happy to be there to enjoy. Then all hell broke loose. We found out while in Mexico that my grandma had hosted my other grandparents, Dad's side, for dinner the night we left, while actively symptomatic, and they were both now COVID positive. Then the truth slowly started coming to light, and we learned that my mom had lied to me about our officiant and his wife both testing negative. Only our officiant had tested. His wife had the sniffles, and they knew if she tested positive I'd throw a wrench in their plans, so they just didn't test her. I got more upset than I've ever been in my life, and texted my mom that we were feeling completely betrayed, and that at the very least my grandma owes an apology to my dad's parents for getting them sick. In return, I got a screenshot from my brother showing that my grandma had texted him, "Tell your sister when I die, she can put selfish bitch who ruined my honeymoon on my headstone." All in all, 26 people are sick, more than 1/3 of our guests. Some are very severely ill. My dad has it the worst. He called me last night to ask how to know it's time to go to the hospital for labored breathing. My mom is denying that she lied. My grandma is texting the entire family trying to get them on her side, and I'm being told I'm overreacting because I'm brainwashed by the leftist media. I had a meltdown on our honeymoon and just sobbed into my new husband's lap for an hour. I don't know how to move past this, or whether I ever want to speak to my mom or grandma again. I feel like COVID aside, they chose to prioritize their own experience at the expense of nearly 30 other people, including us, the wedding couple. I will never forget this betrayal, and I just don't know what to do. I'm mourning the aftermath of my own wedding. OP is certainly not an AH. Instead, her mom and grandma are extremely selfish, and AH for disregarding others' health. Their negligence endangered the lives of many and ruined OP's honeymoon, and now they expect OP to behave normally, which seems impossible. Her frustration is inevitable, and breaking ties with her mom and grandma is 100% justified. They are really AH and deserve at least a 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump onto the next story from accurate_gain_7272. AITA for kicking my husband out of the house after he disrespected our daughter. I, 28F, have been married to my husband Steve, 38M, for 5 years. He has 2 children, Jake, 10M, and Mia, 16F. Steve and Mia have always had a complicated relationship, but things have taken a turn for the worse recently. She and I have a great relationship. Both Jake and Mia call me mom even though I'm their stepmom, and I love them both. Their mother gave up her parental rights. I formally adopted Mia on her 14th birthday and Jake on his 10th birthday. A few months ago, Mia came out as a lesbian. I was incredibly proud of her for having the courage to be open about her identity. But Steve's reaction was anything but supportive. He became distant and cold toward Mia, making snide comments and creating a generally hostile environment. I tried talking to him about it, but he insisted that Mia was just going through a phase and that she needed tough love. Tonight, things came to a head. Mia invited her girlfriend over for dinner, and Steve lost it. He started yelling at Mia, calling her names and saying that she was an embarrassment to the family. He told her that she was no longer welcome in our home if she continued this lifestyle. I was furious. I told Steve that he was being unreasonable and that he needed to leave. He refused, so I packed a bag for him and told him to stay with his brother until he could sort out his feelings. I said, "I am the sole owner of this household, and you have no say over whether or not my daughter can stay in the house I own." He stormed out, calling me a traitor and accusing me of choosing Mia over our marriage. I own my house outright because my parents had willed it to me, and they passed away in a car accident 6 years ago. Steve has been sending me angry messages, accusing me of breaking up our family. His family has also been calling, saying that I overreacted and that Mia needs to respect her father's rules. I feel torn because I believe I did the right thing by protecting Mia, but I also worry about the impact this is having on Jake and our family as a whole. I also feel bad for throwing it in his face that I'm the sole owner of the house. Update. Well, as you could imagine, everything got so much worse. To recap, I, 32F, kicked my husband, 33M, out a couple of weeks ago. He was always berating and belittling me. He is unemployed due to a car accident that he had several years ago, and he refused to do anything. When he cleaned, he would pick up the living room, where the 2 little kids, 3F and 8-month-old F, would play, and he would rarely do that. Instead, he expected me to work my 10-hour shifts, come home, clean the house, wake up in the morning, get all 3 kids ready for school, then go to work. On my days off, I would spend them taking kids to doctors, forcing him to go to his doctor appointments, do the grocery shopping, the laundry, and everything. And when I didn't help him clean, I would get treated like trash and that because I wasn't doing anything. Well, he finally left a week ago, and it has just been awful. He didn't go to his sister's like I told him to do. Instead, he has apparently been staying in the wooded area behind my house. I live on 2 acres. He has come up to my house several times and left notes on my door trying to make me feel bad for him. Well, the notes weren't getting him anywhere, and now he has progressed to banging on my doors and the sides of my house. My best friend offered to come stay the weekend with me to help actually get my house cleaned. And while I was at work on Saturday, they would clean up some more for me. Well, while I was at work, he started with the banging and he was pissed, threw his wallet at my friend and said, "I won't be needing this where I'm going," and then continued to bang on my house until I came home early and called the police. They came out, talked to him to see if he would be willing to go with medics to a mental hospital. Shocker, he didn't go, and the police couldn't make him go. Instead, he just kept drinking beers one after the other. No clue exactly where he got the beers, as he has no access to my money in any way, and I didn't buy them for him. And last night, while I had just got the 2 younger ones to sleep, thankfully my 11-year-old daughter was at her bio dad's, he started banging again, woke up the 8-month-old, scared the out of me and my friend who was in the living room. I called the police again. They came out, looked for him, and couldn't find him anywhere. The police suggested that I go somewhere else for the night at least. Thankfully, my parents don't live very far from me at all, and so we went and stayed with my parents. But as of right now, that's what is happening, and I have no clue what to do at the moment. OP is certainly not an AH for protecting her daughter from her husband's toxic behavior. It is not an overreaction. Instead, it is standing up for the well-being of her children. She did the right thing by prioritizing her children's well-being and creating a safe environment for them. OP is not an AH and deserves 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. On the other hand, OP's husband is a big AH, and I would rate him 2.5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump on to the next story from gold_wind_5888 AITA for crying. When my boyfriend let his best friend's wife alter the dish I made for dinner? My boyfriend, 28M, and I, 22F, met at work 2 years ago. Technically, I was working part-time during undergrad, and he was a customer, but after a couple of months, we started going out. I really love this man, and nothing has happened on this scale before, so I'm very confused about it. My BF has a very tight group of friends. I am well acquainted with them, and their girlfriends. One of them, Dave, just is married to Ellie, fake names. Ellie is an excellent cook and often hosts dinners, and everyone brings a dessert to those dinners. I am the youngest in the group, so most times they brush off my requests for contributing or bringing in a dessert. However, the last time I asked Dave and Ellie if they wanted anything extra like wine or some sweet dish for dinner, they said I could bring one of those sweet dishes I make for my boyfriend. I'm Indian, and even though I can't cook as well as my mom, and I'm well, in a different country for studies, I called my mom up and had her teach me properly how to make a specific Bengali sweet, which is my favorite. I had my friends taste it, and they said it was great. My boyfriend ate some and said it was excellent. Except, last night, I greeted Ellie and kept the dish in the kitchen. When the food was brought out and my boyfriend told everyone I made it, I saw that someone had added cinnamon powder to the sweet. You never have the sweet with cinnamon powder. The dessert tasted like cinnamon, and I felt horrible. Though everyone said thank you, and it was good, I think my face gave it away. And my boyfriend took me aside and said that Ellie had told him that my sweet looked too white and thought some cinnamon might bring some color into it. I don't know. I just felt awful and I started to tear up. My boyfriend then defended Ellie and said that his friends already think I'm a child and not make a big deal of this, and we will talk about it. I told him Ellie asked him first. Couldn't he have told her not to add cinnamon to the sweet? He told me he didn't think it was a big deal and asked me to drop the topic on the way home. I didn't text him goodnight, and this morning he said he was sorry and said my crying made him feel like an awful person. I don't know, now I think I overreacted. AITA? Update. Ellie saw this post. My boyfriend texted me to see if it was me. I said yes. He said we needed to talk. For safety purposes, my best friend will be here. I don't know. I never expected my post to blow up. Update. He said he needed space from the relationship. I think with the way this post blew up and what happened because of a post, I should clear up some things. I never asked if I should leave my boyfriend for this. I asked if this was an overreaction, my crying. But having thousands of people tell me this was racially charged, Ellie wanted power, my BF is etc. My brain went haywire. Boyfriend called yesterday, and when I got there, his house with my best friend, Dave and Ellie were there. Ellie was crying and Dave looked really pissed at me. My BF told me to sit down and Dave started with, how could I make a post that most of the people in the dinner party would recognize and know, and could shame Ellie and my BF. My BF was silent and wouldn't even look at me, and was only shaking his head. It felt like I was a kid, being scolded by my parents with my elder sibling disappointed in my actions. That is what I felt, and it looked. I admit, it was very spineless of me, but Dave went on for like a minute, and I was just looking at my BF, waiting for him to defend me. I asked Ellie, why would she alter my dish, after telling me to bring an Indian dish? She said she thought Indian food would be brown. This woman has more Indian friends than me, and she thinks Indian food is brown. She grew up in the UK, FFs, and I felt so defeated. The comments my friends and people around me telling me his friends came first to him, not me. He said he didn't think the sweet was a big deal. I told him I would never let my friend alter something he spent 3 days learning, getting people to taste it, and got his mom involved in. He saw I put a lot of effort into it, so why let her alter it? Why couldn't he ask me? Ellie started to cry and say that she wasn't being racist and she wouldn't know that I put effort into it, and now she couldn't host dinners again. I said I used fake names, so why does it matter? Unless she and Dave went around telling people. BF told me he didn't expect this from me. My best friend piped up that he expected that my BF would have a spine, so I guess they were both disappointed. My, for example, now ex BF told me in front of Dave and Ellie that he needs some space. I told him to get lost. I don't know what my best friend said to him after that, considering I left BF's flat. I kind of tripped in the metro station, so now I'm crying on my best friend's couch with an ice pack, while his BF keeps giving me peach schnapps, and my relationship has toppled over. I wouldn't have stormed out had he looked at me once. He just looked 100% on Dave and Ellie's side and acted like I was the one with the problem when she caused me hurt. If his friends come first when they cause me hurt, where would I have been if I decided to marry this man? My friends are good to me and are acting like I'm some fragile glass. I even heard my best friend and his brother whispering loudly from the kitchen, and his elder brother wanting to threaten him via Instagram DMs. I hate that this has come to this, considering I have always been the mom friend to my friend group. I'm drunk while writing this, so have some grace in the comments. Also, if you'll be an incel like those people in my DMs telling me I'll never keep a man if I'm this dramatic, please go away. I just thought I needed to update, that's it. Thanks, guys. Edit. Guys, this is the first time I've faced what you all have been calling racism. TBH, I didn't see Ellie putting cinnamon into my roseola as racism. I was just hurt that my days of hard work was ruined, that's it. I understand I need to work on my self-esteem and not let people walk over me. My best friend's elder brother, he's a doctor, and is super pissed at my ex because he didn't know what happened, booked an appointment with a therapist he knows, as he thinks I need mental help to not normalize aggressive behavior. I'm sorry for ranting on Reddit, but I guess that's where I am. Both my best friend and I will be going, he had been there for some time before, and the situation is tense at home because Dada, Bestie's brother, didn't know what was happening and tore my friends a new one for not protesting when Dave said to me. I still haven't told him it was over a Reddit post and that I'm writing heretic feel awful, and I don't know how to tell my mum she was right. I wish I never went out with him. One of my ex's friends, from the dinner party, asked me if I really left my ex over a dessert, so I guess that's what he told people. It hurts. I know it shouldn't, but it hurts. I think it is partially my fault. I shouldn't have let myself be treated like this. There were signs, and I ignored them. And now I think I'll never have another relationship because it feels like a horrible, anxious feeling. OP is certainly not an AH here because Ellie threw cold water on her efforts. It is not about dessert. It is about the culture. It is disregarding the culture of OP. If you don't like Bengali dessert, don't eat it. You cannot just add anything to it. It is really disrespectful. OP is justified here, and I would rate her 0 out of 5 on the AH scale, and Ellie gets 1.5. As for OP's husband, he is being unsupportive to his partner, so he is also an AH, and I would give him at least 2 out of 5. Welcome to a brutal pro-revenge story from Called in the 90s. Revenge on a client who tried to throw me under the bus. I was pushing 40, and I'd learnt a lot of lessons in more than 10 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learnt was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer student after the second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, he told me. First to himself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first, and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will f you, he said. They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and an idiot, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now. But fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized company that did this and that, and owned things here and there, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable real estate portfolio, and one day a building they owned burned to the ground. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Frank, a veteran salaryman, to deal with it. Frank was close to 60 and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me. He had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees, and Frank was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Frank a lot, and he was always nickel and diming me. The insurer is going to f you, I told Frank. It was only by luck that I even knew about the fire and the loss, because Frank had not asked for my help. He'd just let it slip one day, and since then, I'd kept on top of him, trying to get him to smarten up. I'd had to fight to get him to send me the proof of loss form to make sure he hadn't messed that up. Frank f***ed up a lot, and I wondered sometimes how he had a job. But the proof of loss was okay at least, so that was one less thing to worry about. "You don't know that," he said. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. "I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients," I said, "and the insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you, not unless you sue them." But Frank said he knew what he was doing, that it was all under control, and besides, he got along with the adjuster so great. "The limitation period expires in 2 weeks," I said, "and once those 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying, 'Sorry, you're out of time,' and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time." Frank was like, "Sure, fine, whatever. Don't bother me. I got this blah blah blah," and he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again, and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. "I'm going to be at trial, and you won't be able to reach me," my final email said, "but you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue." He didn't bother to reply, and I went off to do my trial. The trial lasted a couple of weeks, and there was no email from Frank. Then a month passed, and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Frank was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Frank. "Remember that fire insurance thing we spoke about?" We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. "So they paid out. That's great, Frank. You were right." He asked me what I was talking about, and could he see a copy of the claim? "What claim?" I said. "The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim." "Does that mean the insurer didn't pay?" I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later, my computer dinged, and there was Frank's email, talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. "I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't. And now that the limitation period is expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it?" I'd made a mistake by not going over Frank's head when he wouldn't listen to me. But if I'd gone over Frank's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now. So I CC'd Frank's boss and his boss's boss, plus I CC'd Bill, the client's in-house counsel. Bill acknowledged my email right away, and called me later that day. "Frank messed up," he said. "We know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do?" "So his excuses didn't work?" "Nope." Bill explained that they'd summoned Frank to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Frank's role is over. The company knew Frank was bullshitting them. So that's it then, Bill said. We just lost a couple of $1,000,000. It's okay, I said, explaining that when I realized that Frank was going to f up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Frank send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim, and short on details, but good enough. You sued without instructions? Bill said. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions, because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever costs the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yep, I said. I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to him as we spoke. It's a little rough, I said, but we can always amend. Thank God, Bill said. Can I leave it with you? Of course he could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them, no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Frank, I said. What's up? What was up was that Frank got called into another meeting, and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box, and security walked him past his coworkers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Frank. He was too old to get another job, or at least, not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Frank, but for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over beers, maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Frank, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus, but the guy who replaced him was great and never nickeled and dimmed me, so it was all good. The revenge was really brutal and eye-opening for Frank. The lawyer's decision to claim the insurance without instructions from Frank saved millions for the client, and it also exposed Frank's incompetence, ultimately crushing his reputation and career. It was a bitter but valuable lesson for the irresponsible Frank. It was not only revenge, but also a proof of OP's professionalism. Let's now jump on to the next story from Weird_Stories. Here? New ownership takes over and guy goes on vacation for 2 years due to stupid new rules. A family friend was working at the same company since he was 26 up to when he was 64, when the below started. I did get his approval to retell the story, just not include anything specific, so I am keeping it anonymous and quite general on the specific details. Part of the problem was the laws in the country increasing the retirement age from 62 to 65 when he was in his early mid-50s, and then again from 65 to 67 when he was about 62 to 63. The old owners were a family and run the business with benefits to the employees. From everything I have heard, I think they were giving an extra vacation week after every 6 years at the company. So on top of the standard 4 weeks, he had an extra 6 weeks at the time of the events. Also, people had access to 2 weeks of working home office, when the job allowed them to, or an extra week off, for those that couldn't use it. So he was getting 11 weeks off each year. As a bonus, the family owners were allowing people above 55 to use their vacation time as they desired. All at once, with about a 2 weeks notice, which was just a courtesy, according to the guy, or segmented, or even not use it and pile it up for when the retirement time came. Another issue we have at our country is that when you submit retirement paperwork to the government, they take ages. So it is often the case that they may take over 2 years to calculate what to pay you and start paying you. Of course they pay back that time, but it still is an issue. For the period they delay and calculate, you are getting only the minimum amount, but the guy had already about 44 years of experience and a bit more ahead of him as an engineer and a well-paid one, which meant a great retirement amount. So the owners allowed for people to gather up their weeks of time off at the end of it and take 20 to 30 weeks off while submitting their retirement paperwork, so the money being paid would last them longer into the calculation period. Of course, some didn't use it, but many did. So the company gets sold because the owners saw some writing on the wall that their profiting wouldn't last more than 6 to 7 years more and they wanted out. It was due to old age as well. New ownership, part of some Coca-Cola subsidiary, takes over and starts removing previous rules. At the guy's position, there were 3 of them. Him, a second colleague, and a third one. They push out the second, fire him, and the third one has a heart attack literally a week later. RIP. They also go and dock his pay by 15% because he is making too much for a simple engineer. The three of them hold a patent for the machinery used on something specific, a second one on how to make that machinery, and a third one on the process of the production of a small but significant part. Old owner had allowed them to put the patents on them when they invented a new, 30% cheaper and 75% faster, way of production years ago. So suddenly, he is alone on that position at 64, and the company hires 6 people for him to train, on that position. At the same time, they give up to the end of the year for all the piled-up vacation time to be claimed. Notice the wording, claimed, not used. So the guy was using between 1 and 5 weeks for the past decade. So he had gathered 87 weeks of time off, including the current year. But they hadn't looked at specific cases, apparently. So they get him the 6 new people to train, and they tell him that he needs to have them trained in 6 months. He still has 2.3 to 2.5 years until retirement. So he just goes and takes 87 weeks of vacation time with a 3 hours notice on a Friday evening starting the upcoming Monday. Still no advance notifying is required. They don't pay attention on it until the next Thursday, when the CEO notices the 6 people sitting around all day and nobody training them. The phone calls start, then emails, then letters get added to the mix, then home visits by low-ranking secretaries and such to deliver the letters, then management visiting his home. By week 7, the CEO has visited 3 times, but the door hasn't been opened once. His mother-in-law lives literally across the street, old woman, and him and his wife are taking care of her, so most of the time they are over there and can see everybody visiting their house XD. The production is actually running on itself, but no upkeep is done on that critical part of it. Week 11, he says that line 1 out of the 2 breaks down. They start visiting his house 3 to 4 times a day. 2 weeks later, second line breaks down. He obviously has a lot of friends inside and is getting constant updates. At that point, they have only 4 weeks of backstock to keep the rest of production running. It is December, right before Christmas, and he goes in during week 13. He says he needs to take some things from his locker room, LOL, and the CEO starts yelling at him. "You are stopping your time off right now. You are coming back to work to fix everything up." So he offers to come back for 3 days under an agreement that the entire week will be returned to him to use for time off. The CEO reluctantly agrees and tries to push him also for the training. No budging, only fix things up and go on vacation again. By Saturday, everything is fixed up and even leaves a couple of basic instructions on what needs greasing every week. And he is off again. Few weeks pass, New Year has come around, and a line is broken again. He gets called back, and CEO pretends like the previous deal will be used again. He goes in for 2 days, fixes everything, explains couple more things to the team of 6, who by now have other duties, not to be sitting around all day. And when he is about to leave, the CEO says, "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. The guy says what? And the CEO explains, "You could claim your time off by the end of last year. You just ended your claimed time off, so you are losing the remaining 69 weeks. The guy is furious, and he just goes straight and reports the company to workers' rights. They are actually dumbfounded by the time off he has amounted, and the lady serving him calls her colleagues to listen in. They laugh their asses off by his story, and they actually issue a verdict the next day. It usually takes weeks, but apparently they had too much fun with this one. He is to get all of his time off under the previous rule, for the time accrued up before the rules changed. So he has his 69 weeks, should be 70 due to him getting the one he worked on, renewed by their deal, but he lost that one. And he also has the 6 weeks from the new year. So he goes in with the verdict and gives it personally to a fuming CEO. According to the guy, steam was coming out of his ears. The CEO accepts unwillingly the deal with the guy coming in, for 3 days every 5 weeks off. If he is needed during his time off, tough luck. They should work to produce backstock. A full year goes by that way, and the guy's is 66 at this point. He has been training the 6 slowly every 5 weeks, LOL, and he is on his last visit before he takes the last 5 weeks off. The CEO goes to him and delivers personally the firing notice for the first day he will be back. He plays shocked and leaves for another 5 weeks. This one is a problem, because if you apply for retirement, even with half a year early less, you are losing significantly more than just that small period, and he has about 10 months ahead of him for retirement. His last 5 weeks expire and he goes in to gather his stuff. Only a coffee cup was remaining. He knew this was coming and he had taken everything over time. He gets an extremely big payout for the firing with no cause. Next day, he sends a cease and desist letter to the company for the use of the 3 patents. He had talked with the fired guy, who had agreed with this revenge plan. He had also talked with the widow of the now dead friend and colleague as well, and had both of them on board. He had been supporting actually the widow, but he didn't say anything to anyone. I found out very recently, informed the other guy about it. So now the company has to stop using those machines, and the method with 0 notice. All the competitors have found and built and patented their own versions of the same, and if they don't find a solution, it is going to cost 40% more, and take about double time to produce the same part of the procedure of production. So they would need to double the lines if they go and use the old method, while they look for a new one. After just 3 weeks of looking to license the method of one of the competitors, and not getting anywhere, stock being extremely low by that point, they struck a deal with the guy. He will be an external contractor, who obviously keeps the patents to his name. He will be doing the maintenance on his own, will be paid by the hour, what he was previously making on a full day, and he will be on call for maintenance while having one person there at all time for upkeep. He went and stole all 6 of the people he trained, and hired them in his new company, and put them to work back at that factory again, with almost double the pay they were receiving. He fully trained them very quickly, and he was now getting paid a ton. That CEO was fired for almost stopping production. The deal was struck mere hours before backstock ended, and he also cost the company a ton of money by firing that guy. At the funeral of the old owner, many of the old employees met up and told their different stories, and apparently there were 3 more similar cases with patent holders, because the old owner treated his team extremely well. But he apparently was the only one to string them on for almost 2 years by being out on vacation time and getting paid. All of them had a great laugh, including the widow of the owner and his sister, who were the other 2 partners in the factory before it got sold. It was edited to fix mistakes only. Apologies for the hard reading. Update. Correction. 2 points I noticed that are not clear. The 6 people he stole from the factory to work for his new company that are then contracted back to the factory are earning what he was making when he worked at the company, and was considered too much. Their salary was extremely lower, so my comment above about them Kiang double is incorrect. Apparently the factory was paying all 6 combined what the hero was making before he got that 15%. So for all of them, it was a huge pay raise. I would leave the factory as well if I received an offer for the same exact work, but an increase of about 550%. This I learned from the hero as an update. Apparently at the time that they stroked that last deal for him to work as a contractor, the backstock was 2 hours from finishing. But what was his last ace up his sleeve in negotiating was that, don't forget that I need at least 3 days to fix both lines, so you already need to shut the factory down for 3 days. And every minute you delay this deal, it's another minute of the entire factory being down. Apparently, a single line couldn't produce enough for production to resume. 2 lines produce about 110 to 120% of the required thing for production to continue, so he needed to get both lines up. The factory actually shut down for almost 4 days, and those idiots didn't pay the workers for those 4 days that they were not working, which ended up a class action from over 800 workers at the Workers' Rights Office, which led to a fine and forcing the factory to pay them. And that was the last drop that made the glass overflow. The news got to management from outside the country and ended up costing the CEO his job. The revenge was intense and satisfying. The new administration wanted to screw OP over, but fed up with the new rules, OP used his secret weapons, engineering patents and long privileged vacations, to cripple the company's production process, forcing them to hire him again at a higher pay and causing the CEO to resign. The revenge was truly a masterclass. 1 in 1,000. Let's now jump on to the next story from Flowing_Oddity. Say goodbye to your house and your retirement. This one is not technically my revenge, but some revenge I got to see up close and take joy from and slightly participate in. The background is most of the story, so this will be a little long. Trigger warning for self-harm. I was in the Navy and stationed at the submarine base in Connecticut. I had a friend I met in boot camp, and we were in the same class for our A school, Navy job training. We'll call that friend Bill. Now, Bill wasn't the most physically fit guy. He was short, kind of chubby, and wore glasses. However, Bill was really smart, and as the sonar technician he was meant to be, he would have been amazing. He had a pragmatic way of looking at things I really valued in a friend, and I know it would have made him successful if he had made it out to the fleet. While in school, we had a couple of petty officers that were hard. They somehow convinced themselves they were super soldiers, despite the fact that our jobs in that field are really nerd-centric. You get picked for that job because of your math and computer skills, not your deadlift number. Still, they were both all about being fit and working out all the time. We would do physical training 3 times a week, and while most of us could keep up, Bill often fell behind on runs or didn't quite meet what these two idiots believed to be the standard. To be clear, Bill did pass the minimum requirements for fitness, he just didn't go as extreme as these guys. Side note for other Navy vets, he got the MC pawn coin for how hard he pushed himself at PT the day he visited. The end result was that they would constantly berate and belittle Bill. They'd call him fat, lazy, and everything else. They'd tell him he should kill himself, you name it. They were always on his despite him passing his assessments. At some point, Bill pushed himself too hard and injured his knee. He told these petty officers he was injured and had been seen by the doctor on base. The doctor had put him on light duty so the knee could recover. He had the paperwork to back it up. They elected to ignore that and threaten him with kicking him out if he didn't do the workouts. So Bill kept pushing himself, injuring himself more, and his mental health degraded the whole time. In my time in the Navy, you didn't really get mental health services. The only person to talk to like that was the chaplain. For those who don't know, the chaplain is the religious leader, usually a pastor/priest/rabbi, that has signed up as a commissioned officer. Our chaplain was the sweetest little woman you ever met, but as a chaplain, she held the rank of captain, high-ranking officer. So Bill set up a meeting with the chaplain to talk about things. When Bill informed the petty officers he would be missing class the next day for his chaplain meeting, they yelled at and berated him more. They called him a cat, useless, not fit for the Navy, and everything else you can imagine. They convinced Bill he was being weak and the chaplain wouldn't care about his issues, that nobody would care. They promised to make life even harder if he didn't show the next day. So he cancelled his meeting. Evidently, bad luck hit, and that night his girlfriend was also breaking it off with him. She wasn't worth his time or money, but he couldn't see that. That night, I awoke to a 3 a.m. call from Bill. I couldn't hear anything, and I asked several times, "Bill, you there? Are you okay?" It wouldn't have been the first time that I got a drunk dial from one of my friends after a hard day like Bill had. Sailors have been known to drown their sorrows a bit. Eventually, I figured it was a butt dial drunk dial and hung up and went back to bed. I still regret that decision. The next day, all hell broke loose. Me and a couple other friends got calls from Bill's now ex-girlfriend, informing us he was in the hospital because he slit his own throat. It turned out a few of us got that 3 a.m. call, but Bill couldn't speak at the time and was kind of out of it due to blood loss. We finished what we had to do on base and rushed over to the hospital. As we got there, the chaplain was on her way out, and we passed her in the hallway. She spoke to us briefly to say that Bill would be okay, and she wouldn't forget this. I have never seen a look on someone's face that so accurately depicted raw, unfiltered rage. It took us all by surprise because she was such a small, sweet, and personable lady. But from the look in her eyes, you could just tell she wanted someone to pay for this. She wanted revenge, and we all knew she wore the kind of rank that could get it done. We visited Bill, who could barely talk, but he told us the story of what had happened, what he was thinking at the time, and how glad he was it didn't work. Apparently it was cold enough that the blood clotted on the outside of his neck, and made a kind of patch that kept him alive long enough for the EMS to find him and get him to a hospital. The doctor said he missed his carotid by about 1 millimeter. A week went by, and we hadn't heard anything until we got called in by the chief of the training command, the boss to these petty officers. He said he wanted to check on the rest of us and make sure there weren't any other issues with these guys he wasn't aware of, and that we were all okay. I let him know about an ass chewing he gave me a few months back, that I was really set up by these guys, and they had lied to him. My friends cited a couple other examples of their own, with these guys being generally dishonest people. I don't think it mattered. I think their fates were already sealed, and we were being asked for more ammo to bury them with. The next day, they were nowhere to be found, and we were introduced to new instructors who would be taking over our training permanently. After class, I decided to stop by and ask the chaplain what happened. She told me she had never been more disgusted by the actions of a sailor than these two guys who convinced someone not to come see her. She teared up a bit, regretting that she didn't get the chance to help Bill before he made his attempt. In her mind, it was these two that precipitated and enabled Bill's attempt. So on to the revenge. The chaplain told me she went to the admiral in charge of the entire base and demanded their immediate discharge. He granted it. Both petty officers were immediately processed out with dishonorable discharges. I can't remember the exact charge I heard they cited for it, but I know the Navy has a way of selling BS on paper when they want a certain outcome, especially officers at that high level. So basically, they get no VA benefits of any kind, got kicked out of the base housing they lived in, and could probably only find work at a gas station or under-the-table stuff somewhere. Also, I know from someone else who got the boot that the Navy only pays for a single bus ticket to get you back home, not your family or any of your belongings. When you have a discharge like that, no company with DoD contracts is allowed to hire you. That includes McDonald's because they have stores on bases throughout the country, Taco Bell, Subway, etc. None of them will give you a job. They can't, and they don't want to anyway. So, I don't know where these guys went or what became of them, but I know their lives were irrevocably ruined. One of them had about 18 years in, so he was 2 years from retirement and lost it all. The other was at about 12 years, so he also lost a lot. Wherever they are now, I'd be very surprised to hear they're making more than minimum wage. As for Bill, well, he made a full recovery. He got a full medical discharge, which is an honorable discharge that meant E5 pay for the rest of his life, full benefits, and a referral to a counselor in his home state once he got back there. All paid for by the Navy. We lost touch over the years, but I did see on Facebook he got himself together, became a police officer, and got married. Edit to add, for those who have pointed it out, their discharges were actually OTH, but I didn't want to have to explain the difference or have people Google it. We always used dishonorable colloquially for OTH BCD because they all mean you got the boot and your life is going to stink. But no, they didn't do full CM or any break time. But I did hear they pushed it to ASB and lost. Also saw someone pointed out Bill wouldn't get the medical at 100% for his neck. That's also true, he wouldn't have, but they wrote it up for his knee because it was basically bone on bone inside. I think they decided to do him a favor and not put him down as a mental health discharge. Really gratifying revenge. The revenge was really satisfying and perfectly executed. The petty officers received the punishment they deserved. The chaplain made sure that the abusive officers faced life and career-destroying consequences by stripping them of their retirement benefits and future opportunities. The revenge was swift, complete, and aligned with the harm they caused to Bill. Welcome to a thrilling Am I the A-hole story. It was a short affair. I had been deployed and was suspicious of a neighbor, helping my wife out around the house, lawn, fixing stuff, etc. Way too much for my comfort zone. Then, sometime later, I found out his wife had moved to stay with her parents because he was set to be deployed. Then, at one point, I called her, and she told me she was going out for a girls' night with some friends. I was totally okay with that, but asked if the man in question was going along. And sure enough, he was. I could see the writing on the wall, clear as could be. I told her there and then, if she did anything inappropriate, there would be severe consequences for our marriage. After that, things seemed to go back to normal, and she never mentioned him again. Of course, I found out later he had gone on deployment, so naturally, there would be no more hearing about him. About a month later, I returned home. When I met her at the airport, with kids, she was bawling, and I mean ugly bawling. I thought it was kind of weird, but figured I knew why. Seeing bits of evidence here and there and always having that nagging suspicion, I never stopped poking and prodding. She even once said, "If you don't shut up with these questions, you're going to ruin our marriage." Finally, after about 4 months, she confessed in a fit of tears. Without making this an extremely long story, I'll just leave it that I decided on reconciliation, mostly for the kids. We stayed together another 15 years before she passed away. It was a rough 15 years for me as she had issues, many of which likely led to her passing. Really long story. Her guilt, my roller coaster of emotions, etc. I wasn't nice for quite a while. Her cheating destroyed something in me that I still have issues with, even now. She turned me into someone I didn't like for a few years. I was struggling. After she passed, I met my next, now, wife. She's awesome. I met her only a couple of months after my FWW, former wayward wife, passed, and it really irritated me. I had big plans on single life fun, and this awesome lady waltzes into my life, damn it. I now know what having a faithful, worthy, loving wife is all about. We've been together now for 16 years. Wow, how I wish I could have my 15 years of reconciliation with my FWW back. So yes, the whole affair part of the story happened 32 years ago. The longer I'm married to my now wonderful wife, the more I resent my FWW. Nowadays, I'm disgusted I ever met her. I'm disgusted I stayed with her. I'm disgusted with everything associated with her. While I didn't wish for her passing, now I'm happy for the second chance at a happy life. I'd never realized how dirty and unhappy I felt while I was with her. The only good thing I got from her were the kids. I know, harsh, right? Sorry, but that's how it is. So one day, for some reason, I was looking at Facebook and got wondering if my FWW's affair partner and his wife were still together. Sure enough, they were. In fact, it just so happened that she had recently posted, celebrating her anniversary. I sat and read all about how the best decision she ever made was marrying that POS husband of hers. Back in 1992, I was not given the opportunity to expose her cheating husband to her. In 2023, that's exactly what I did. I wrote her a long DM. I apologized first, but said she deserved the truth and figured they could now have the burden I'd carried for decades. Never heard any reaction, don't really care. AITA? OP is an AH here, a big AH. Despite hiding his late wife's affair from others, OP texted a long paragraph to AP's wife after 30 years, revealing their affair. What OP did was totally unreasonable and futile. I don't understand why OP didn't do the same when he caught her wife's affair. As for scores, I would rate OP 1.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now jump onto the next story from mysterious_nebula_96. After 2 years of no contact, my husband's youngest daughter, 15, wants to reconnect to meet our newborn. AITA for refusing? This is a long story with tons of backstory, but I'm really just looking for advice on my particular situation right now. Sorry for the formatting. It's late at night here and I'm with a baby sleeping on me. I've been with my husband for 10 years. For the first 8 years, we were very present in his youngest kid's life. We met them when they were 3M, 5F, and the eldest was 16F. The 2 young ones are with one ex, and the eldest with another, present as in every weekend at ours, long holidays with us, etc. We were extremely happy together. The ex-mother of the youngest children never liked me, but whatever, the kids were happy, and we were also happy. I thought I couldn't have kids, so I was loving my situation. Right around COVID, we went for full custody as the mother's boyfriend was showing signs of abuse towards the kids and their mother. We were in the courts for 2 years fighting for main custody until one Christmas day when things blew up. I'll try to explain and keep it short because it's not. Months before Christmas, the youngest daughter and the eldest began getting into some really weird behaviors. Even though we were giving the youngest a €100 allowance and paying costs for the eldest, plus all the alimonies, they started behaving like we weren't providing enough. The eldest sister started getting weirdly protective of her sister, and it came out through different times and different drama explosions that the youngest told the oldest we were refusing money and just being mean. This led the oldest sister to start being confrontational about everything. What lunch I was making, how much the clothes I bought them cost, etc. Everything started to become an insult we weren't even aware we were doing until weeks later when someone started crying and screaming. I want you all to understand, we had weekly family meetings to discuss how we felt, weekly therapy sessions, we were all in therapy. I really tried my best with the kids, and I did. I know it's Reddit, and I'm going to be torn a new one, but my husband and I really did all we could. The youngest daughter, aided by the oldest, just really began to spiral, which led to Christmas. Basically, it all started because in our home, we opened the gifts after dinner. The morning began with the eldest and youngest texting me nonstop that they wanted to open the gifts first. I said no. Then they said they'll not come if I don't. And because I was dealing with some serious people-pleasing problems, after a while, I just said yes. But they were still angry. When they arrived, they went straight to open the gifts, and they seemed a bit disappointed. We had dinner, and after, we decided to play a game. When the youngest began whining about not winning a round, I just told her to please let it go so we can continue. This led to the eldest screaming at both of us about how awful we are to the youngest, how cheap we are with our gifts, and how much she hates having to care for her sister. I normally would have taken control of the situation and appeased everyone, but at that moment, something broke in me. The eldest kept on screaming, called their mother, telling her we were mistreating the kids, and packed them up and left, effectively spearheading our court case we spent 2 years on to have the kids out of the house. We were heartbroken, receiving a barrage of texts accusing us of being cheap with them, not putting them first, not making them happy. I shut down completely. Eventually, they made it clear that they wanted nothing to do with us. Shortly after, we got an option to move away from the city and into the countryside. We did. We moved fast. My husband has seen his kids, but I haven't. They've come to visit their grandmother, but very clearly avoided seeing their father or me. I'm very okay with this. I'm happy they don't want me in their lives, because everything just becomes perceived wrongs, and it's just like walking on eggshells all the time. It was just awful. Now fast forward 2 years, we just welcomed our baby boy, and I'm so happy. Of course, my husband has communication with his kids, and they know of him. Now the youngest daughter offered to come to our home for one night to meet our son and to celebrate her birthday. We live in a generational house, meaning we live with grandma in a big house, so there's enough place for her. The problem is, I don't want to. I know my husband does, and I get it, but I've had so much peace. I also don't want my boy to become the subject of conversation in their homes. I don't want her to see my home, my spaces. I know I sound like a monster, but I don't want her holding my baby. I don't want him to be exposed to them. I know this is probably trauma speaking, but I don't want to feel like I have to walk on eggshells again. I also know my husband is a father, and don't want to veto this. What would you do? How do I navigate this? OP is not an AH here. Her concerns are 100% justified. OP does not want to expose her newborn to potential family drama, and it is the best choice for her. OP is not an AH here. She has every right to choose peace for her newborn and for herself. So, OP is not an AH here, and I would rate her 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from glittering-ad-874. AITA for cursing at a customer and telling them we won't sell to them anymore. My husband and I raise our own chickens and sell our eggs locally. A lot of our customers are elderly. This one customer, an older gentleman in his 60s or 70s, came over and didn't come to the front door. Our house security wasn't tripped by the front door camera, but the side camera showed movement, but instead came to our coop to run. No big deal, we were out tending to the flock anyway, even though we don't like people coming near our coops runs due to theft. We spoke briefly, helped him know where we get our feed, and got him eggs, the whole shebang. The first odd aspect of him was that he wanted to buy some of our chickens. All of our chickens were bought either from TSCRK or a local hatchery. Our flock is worth at least $600, and I have one turkey, Handsome Man, who is my absolute favorite boy in the whole wide world. So suffice to say, I am a protective head hen. A few days later, about midweek while my husband was at work, I let our best girls out, Elsie, our Native American dog, and Sinin, our border collie, to go potty and enjoy their yard. We have an invisible fence that surrounds the coop to deter animals and thieves from reaching our birds. While I was inside doing house chores, the same old man apparently came down the drive and parked in our second driveway that had our posted "No trespassing private property" signs. I didn't realize he was even here until I heard Elsie barking at him. I looked out the window and there he was near our coop, shooing Elsie away with his hand. Elsie stood firm and continued to bark, but kept her body between him and the coop. Realizing she wasn't going to let him near, he started to move towards the front, with Elsie taking small steps towards him each time, but never actually advancing on him or closing the distance. There was always at least 7 feet between them. Once he got to the porch, my daughter answered the door to tell him that we didn't have any eggs to sell. We were sold out. And at this time, my border collie Sinin realized that a visitor was here. She came out of her hiding spot and barked a few times, but she's a loving little girl who loves pets and people. She's not for protection, but she's our first warning system because she barks. This man then grabbed my broom that I keep outside to sweep our porch and advanced on my dogs, swinging at them and trying to hit them. I instantly reacted, yelling at him to not hit my dogs and to get the heck off my property, and told him he wasn't welcome here, nor would we sell our eggs to him anymore. So, AITA? TLDR. Suspicious man comes when he thinks no one is home. My husband's truck wasn't in the driveway. Goes near our precious flock, but our best girls stop him. He tries to hit them for doing their job. OP is not an AH here. Her aggressive behavior towards the customer is 100% justified. The old man tried to enter OP's property without permission and attempted to attack her dog, despite knowing that they no longer sell eggs. So, as for the scores, I would rate the customer 3.5 out of 5 and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's move on to the next story from Visible-Broccoli-381. AITA for breaking up with my fiancé for telling her best friend she was not engaged. My now ex-fiancé, 30F, and I, 27M, got engaged 3 weeks ago. We've been dating for 5 years, and I finally got the money to give her the wedding she wanted. Well, 3 days ago, we were discussing our guest list, and I asked if she wanted to invite her best friend, let's call him James, 30M. James lives in another state, but since they were friends for 10 years, I thought I could even pay for his travel expenses, since it would be great to have her best friend at the wedding. She denied, saying that it would take a lot of work to bring him, and she wanted it to be a family event. Countless times, she mentioned that James was like family to her, so I insisted. She got annoyed and said, I didn't even tell him we were engaged. That took me by surprise. I tried to ask why, but she started stonewalling me, and I left her alone. After a couple of hours, I tried to ask her again why she hadn't told him we were engaged, and she still refused to tell me, and I admit my insecurity got the better of me. In the past, James had confessed he had feelings for her, which she turned down, and basically friend-zoned him. But by the way she told me, it always sounded like she had him as a backup, something not only me, but her exes realized. She married him online. They always made their WoW characters look like a couple, like wearing the same transmog and stuff like that. When she had a fight with her exes, he was always there for her, and so on. I told her that made me uncomfortable, and if she was not planning to tell him, she might as well consider herself single, because I would not marry someone who couldn't be honest. Yes, I was pretty immature, but she did something even more immature. She texted him while showing me her phone something like, "Hey, just so you know, I was engaged, but not anymore," and sent it to him. I told her to pack her things and leave my house. Ever since she left, she has been calling me, but I refused to answer. My mom called me and said that I was an asshole for ending things for such a ridiculous thing. So, AITA? Update. Hey guys, I just got home after talking to my, still, ex-fiancé, and since a lot of people asked for an update, here it is. But I want to clarify a few things. As commented on my original post, I pay for the house since I bought it before dating her, and I asked her to move in since it was close to her job. I work from home since I'm in tech, but she had to go to work. That's why I paid for her car, to help her commute, and honestly, her salary is I was her partner, so I didn't see any problem with that. I thought she was the one. Despite everything, she is smart, funny, we had chemistry, but I felt betrayed. To the update. We met at a coffee shop on the premise we would discuss how to save our relationship, at least that's what she thought. As soon as we sat down, I asked to see their messages. She got defensive immediately and told me she had deleted everything. I asked to see her phone anyway. She started to cry, ugly cry, asking me to stop. At that point, I had already decided I was not going to be part of the relationship anymore, but damn, I was curious. It took a good 20 minutes for her to hand me her phone, a lot of crying, even a waitress asking her if she was okay. So I read the messages. There wasn't any cheating like being exchanged, them professing their love for each other, but what I read still stung. There was a lot of shit-talking about me. A lot. Texts and texts of them saying how terrible of a person I was, criticizing my hobbies, I like video games and pro wrestling, saying I wasn't a real man because of them and stuff like that. But there were two topics that caught my eye. One where she had told him I was having trouble getting hard, and that was frustrating for her. And one where she was complaining about how she didn't want to be stuck in our relationship. Yes, I was having problems in bed, because I was sad because my father had passed away 6 months ago, and the stuck thing. I remember telling her that when we got married, if she wanted she could leave her job, and I would provide for both of us. I don't know if she took this the wrong way, but I guess it was related to that. I honestly don't know. By the time I gave her the phone back, she was already giving excuses on why she was saying those things to him, how he was like a therapist for her, and then she asked me, "Don't you complain about me to your friends?" And I simply replied, "No, I don't." She started crying again. I took a pretty deep breath and just said, "Just give me the ring back." I didn't have the ring with me, like some suggested. She hesitated a bit but gave it to me anyway. I stood up and asked her to delete my number and to not bother me anymore. I called her mom and asked her to pick up her daughter's stuff at my place. Her mom is a good person. I'm just realizing I'm going to miss her as I write this. She understood why I decided to end it, but she didn't ask much. And to be honest, I'm glad she didn't. As for my mom, I didn't call her. I just blocked her for things unrelated to this post. I just realized she never had my back in anything. I was always trying to save an already failed mom-son relationship. Before I leave, I just want to clarify. I was never against her having male friends, or any type of friends. People are going to cheat, friends or no friends. I remember my dad saying something to me when I was a teenager. He always said, "Opportunity makes the thief," but I do not agree with that. Anyway, since I have the next 2 weeks off work, I'm going to figure out what to do with the wedding money, drink some booze, play games, and watch Monday Night Raw later. Edit. A couple of people are asking about the car. It is a 2015 Nissan Versa, which she crashed 2 times. Both times she rear-ended someone. I never liked the car, weak engine, the interior feels cheap and overall bad, so for all I care, she can keep that piece of shit. I would have more luck throwing it off a cliff than selling it. Edit 2. Little update. Her mom called me a few hours ago to check on me and to ask when she could come and pick up X's stuff. We spoke about the car, and she basically forbade me to let her daughter keep the car because 1. I paid for it. 2. X wouldn't be able to maintain it, so I'm going to keep the car until I'm able to sell it. God help me. Also, some people called the story fake because they said I wasn't a real man for playing games, and yet they played WoW. To be honest, that's on me because I wasn't very clear. The real man thing was more about the pro wrestling hobby than the gaming hobby, but in some messages, they clearly mocked me for playing some games. Life is Strange series. In one, I remember James saying something like, "How could a grown-ass man play such a girly game and cry?" Yes, I cried playing Life is Strange. I also cried to RDR2. The I'm Afraid cutscene still makes me emotional. I'm a crybaby, I guess. Also, I want to thank everyone who messaged me to talk about wrestling and games. It really helped me take my mind off everything. I haven't replied to everyone, but I intend to. If anything happens, I'll let you guys know. Be good people. OP is not an AH for breaking off the engagement. His fiancée emotionally disrespected him and belittled him in front of his friends, which cannot be justified. Partners are supposed to respect one another and stand for each other, but there is nothing like this. So, OP's fiancée is an AH here, and I would rate her 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. And OP is not in the wrong, so he would get 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from Several-Lobster 3237. My fiancé is considering breaking off our engagement, revealing the lack of compatibility in our relationship. I, 28F, and my fiancé, 29M, have been engaged for 3 months and dating for 2.5 years. Everything was going great, and we were very happy, but recently we started having some issues. We are not having a wedding ceremony, mainly because we want to start having children soon and don't want to spend that kind of money. Both of our families live abroad, so it would be very expensive to fly everyone out and reserve it for our down payment on our house. We decided to buy a house together, and after that get legally married and start our family once we get settled. This is where the issues came. I come from a family of farmers, the fruits and vegetables kind, not the animal type, from both sides of my family. But my parents are not farmers. My dream has always been to have a farm, for personal use, not as a job. But my fiancé doesn't want that, and I accepted that. However, one thing that is non-negotiable for me is my chickens. I have 10 chickens, and he knows that. So when house hunting, I was looking for a house with a decent backyard to be able to raise them freely as they do in the house I'm renting for now. He started getting distant and avoiding me after I told him I planned to bring my chickens to our new house, but I didn't put two and two together until I asked him a week later. After a week of being avoided, I decided to go to his house to talk things out this past Saturday. I asked him what was wrong with him, and he said that he thought I would get rid of my chickens before moving together, and that's why he was putting up with it. But that he didn't want chickens in our house, and that it was making him reconsider our relationship, because in his words, he didn't want someone who came with a package and then asked me to get rid of my chickens. This made me extremely angry, and I admit that I lost it. I started hysterically crying and told him that my chickens were more important to me than our relationship. Not true at all, I said this without thinking in a state of panic. So if he was not willing to accept that my chickens are coming with me, then we were done. I got in my car and went home, where I spent the whole day crying. He tried calling me, and I did not pick up because I didn't want to say more things I didn't mean, which I told him in a message. On Sunday, I was feeling better and decided to call him, and we agreed to meet for coffee that same afternoon to talk about it. I started by apologizing about what I told him, and I told him it was not how I felt at all, to which he told me that he knew I didn't mean it, and that he didn't hold it against me. I decided to be honest with him, and told him about the farm thing, how it was my life dream, and that it affected me, not being able to have this when we could well afford it. We are both engineers and have decent salaries, and he wouldn't need to do anything on it. I was honest about how I was not aware of the impact this had on me, until he asked me to get rid of my chickens, which, as weird as it may sound, I love like my own children, ultimately asking me to get rid of the last piece of my childhood dream, and how that just set me off. He said I was being selfish, and that he needed some time to think, because he was not sure if this is how he wanted his life to be from now on, which I accepted, though, being honest, I don't understand. I talked to my best friend about this, and she told me to just give up the farm thing, insinuating I was in the wrong, but, I assume, not wanting to directly tell me. I and my fiancé have not talked after that, and I'm giving him the space to think about our situation. Am I really in the wrong here? I genuinely do not understand why this is such a big deal, and I feel like he really must not love me as much as I thought he did, if he doesn't want my dreams to come true, and it's eating me alive. Any advice is appreciated, but please don't be too harsh. Update. Hello, I wanted to give an update to my post since a lot has happened in a week, and honestly, I need to get it off my chest. I also wanted to thank everyone for giving their thoughts on the situation and taking the time to respond. I guess this does not come as a surprise to anyone, I included, but we broke up. There is a lot more to the story than what I knew, and honestly, I am still trying to process everything that has happened. After almost a week of no contact, he called me on Friday and told me he wanted to talk to me as soon as possible. So I told him to wait for me in my house, and I would go there once I was done with work. I got home at 9 p.m., and I found him drunk on my couch crying while hugging his dog. Why was his dog in my house? I had no clue either. By the time I got home, he was way too drunk to have a conversation with me, so I put him to sleep and decided we would talk the next day. I woke up first, so I started cleaning the kitchen, which he made a mess trying to find any alcohol. But at some point, he came in, looked at me straight in the eyes, and told me, "I'm moving to New York. We are over," before even saying good morning. After that, he tried to leave, but I grabbed him and asked him to explain himself. We talked, and he finally explained himself. He told me how before everything happened, he thought about living on a farm, and how the more he thought about it, the more he liked it, and that he was thinking about suggesting it to me again. After he said that there was no way he could live that way, and to just forget about it. After that, he told me everything that has been happening recently. Apparently, a day before he started ignoring me, his boss told him that there was a vacancy in a role he could take in the main office in New York. He was working in a branch in our city, and he asked for a day to think about it, but he really wanted to take it. He talked to his mom about it, and she told him that it was good and that we both could move to New York together and start there as a new family. After that, he decided to call my best friend, IDKY, and she told him that I would never approve of moving to New York, and he shouldn't even suggest it because I would get mad, that he should either move alone or reject the job, but not tell me. This makes me sound horrible, but I swear I can communicate. I do not know why she says that. After that, he called his mom again and told her that he was moving to New York alone and breaking off our engagement. And his mom told him that it was a horrible idea and that he should just reject the offer because he was getting old and needed to start a family soon. Mind you, this man is pushing 30 and still doing everything his mom tells him, so of course he decided to do just that. The next day, he rejected the offer, and that's when he started ignoring me. During the week he was ignoring me, he thought about everything and decided that the best idea was to make me sacrifice things too, until he didn't feel bad about rejecting the job offer anymore. So everything started with asking me to get rid of the chickens. He called me selfish because he gave up a lot for me, but I wasn't willing to give up my pets for him. Mind you, I did not know he had rejected the job offer, and he asked for time to think about our engagement because he didn't feel better about anything after telling me to give up something. And he had to think about how far he should go to feel better about rejecting the job offer, or if he would feel better at all after I gave up almost everything for him. So basically, the chickens were never an issue. He was just trying to make me feel miserable because he was. On Friday, he came to the conclusion that he did not hold enough power over me to make me give up everything for him, finally. So he decided to just move to New York alone and break up with me. He contacted his boss to ask if the job offer was still valid, but after 2 weeks, it obviously wasn't. But there was a lower position available, worse than his current job, and since he had already made up his mind, he just took it. That's when he called me and told me he needed to talk to me ASAP. He went home, picked up his dog, too big to bring to an apartment, so he's just getting rid of it by giving it to me, said by him, and came to my house to drink everything I had in my home. After telling me all of this, he decided it was an amazing idea to ask for the ring back, but after everything he said, there's no way I was not selling it and taking the money. That's the situation we are in now. He left after that, and obviously left the dog in my house. This weekend was hard. It's weird to go from engaged to single, but it's better to break it off now than when I have given up everything for him, and we have children stuck in the middle of everything. I'm also trying to figure out whether my best friend is really my best friend or not. I did not go into detail, but this bitch dragged me through the mud to my ex. But that's another story. I also contacted my boss today and asked if there was any possibility of working from home full-time. I currently work from home 4 days a week and go to the office on Friday, and it might be possible in a few months, so I'm very excited to move further away from the city and getting my dream farm. Hopefully I find a farm man to build my dream farm and a big family with ha. But for now, I am focusing on myself and my chickens, and I am going to buy a coop like those in movies with seats for each one of them that look like a little house, because after all this, I feel like I deserve it. Anyways, I am doing better than I expected, and I am loving having his Saint Bernard in my house. It makes it feel a lot fuller, and I love it. I don't know if anyone wanted an update, but that's it. Hope you enjoy. If anyone has any tips on how to get over all of this, let me know. OP's fiancé's reaction of breaking off the engagement shows poor communication and lack of compatibility. OP is not an AH here. She is justified in pursuing her dreams to maintain her identity. OP's fiancé is an AH here, a big AH. So, I would like to rate OP's fiancé 2.5 and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. What do the Mac Reddit fans think? Is the OP an AH or not? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like the stories I brought you, just hit the like button, share them as much as you can, and don't forget to subscribe to Mac Reddit for a daily dose. Bye bye. See you tomorrow with some more spicy fries.